Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, that was a room that got quiet quickly. Maybe I'm too used to speaking in the evening when you've all been drinking and it takes longer to settle the room. My name's Suzanne Clark. I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the entire chamber, welcome to the third U.S.-Ukraine Partnership Forum. I'd like to start by recognizing our esteemed guests, starting with Her Excellency, the Prime Minister Sverdenko. The Prime Minister is joined by members of her cabinet, as well as Her Excellency and our friend, Ambassador Stefanishnia, who is truly, I've lost her, there she is, truly a champion for the U.S.-Ukraine economic and security relationship. We are also fortunate to be joined by the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Ben Black. The DFC is overseeing the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, which supports supply chain resilience and shared U.S.-Ukraine economic security and prosperity. The U.S. Chamber is a strong proponent of the fund. We believe it could be a global model for successful public-private partnership and a force for good and shared economic growth in both of our countries. We were delighted to partner with the DFC for today's important conversations. I also want to acknowledge Andy Hunder, president of AmCham Ukraine. Thanks to you and Tatiana and your entire team for all you do every day to support American companies on the ground. Finally, a special thank you to the many companies represented here today who are already making a difference in Ukraine, particularly to our friends at GE Vernova, who serve as chair of the Ukraine Business Initiative. Throughout the Chamber's 114-year history, we have stood up to protect and defend and promote free enterprise. We are committed to supporting Ukraine because we know that the fates of democracy and free enterprise are intertwined. we launched the Ukraine Business Initiative to unify and to facilitate business community involvement in the country's rebuilding and economic revitalization process. And the private sector has stepped up to the challenge. This initiative now includes companies from a wide range of industries and sectors, from tech and agriculture to financial services and energy, consumer products, infrastructure, and more. All of these companies, all of these industries are deeply committed to the reconstruction, recovery, and modernization of Ukraine. The Chamber brings these business executives together with senior U.S. and Ukrainian government officials to discuss the art of the possible in contributing to Ukraine's growth and dynamism. We were delighted to host President Zelensky in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last fall, and we regularly meet with key Ukrainian policymakers, including the Prime Minister, who we'll hear from in just a minute. Collectively, this initiative is the key business platform for the urgent investment and engagement in Ukraine needs. To be clear, what happens in Ukraine is a matter of national security, not just for Europe, but for our own country as well. Against the backdrop of turmoil in the Middle East, today's discussions have even greater urgency, because what happens there will impact the rest of the world, including Ukraine. Today's forum will present steps we can take, working together to identify avenues for capital mobilization and investment, to build a stronger energy and raw materials market in Ukraine, and to innovate on dual-use technologies that can improve security and quality of life on both sides of the Atlantic. And we want to build on what this partnership has achieved since we launched the forum 3 years ago. We see progress in many areas, whether it's the concrete investments the DFC and U.S. Treasury recently announced, or the investment the companies here today have chosen to make and will continue to make, which help foster a prosperous, democratic Ukraine. So we're looking forward to these productive conversations today, the progress that will continue to emerge from these discussions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the Prime Minister. She was appointed in July of 2025. She previously served as First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy, along with other roles throughout a decade-long career in public service. We are delighted today to welcome her back to the Chamber. Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency, the Prime Minister.
Dear business leaders, member of the Congress, and distinguished guests, before I speak about strategy, geopolitics, commerce, I must take a moment to speak from the heart. Susanna, my dear friend, so thank you for arranging this business breakfast and this event as well. And there is a kind of courage that's shown on the battlefield, and there is kind of courage that is shown in boardrooms when the world seems to be falling apart. But U.S. Chamber did not just organize the forum of support of our economic partnerships in the start of full-scale invasion. You organize lifelines. You mobilize the immense might of American business, not merely to protect investment, but to protect Ukrainian human lives. And we're extremely, extremely grateful because of the relentless advocacy of your chamber and because of the companies sitting in this very room today. Ukrainian hospitals kept the light on. Our logistic network kept moving food to the front lines, and thousands of Ukrainian families retained to the profound dignity of paycheck amidst the ruins of war. So thank you once again for hosting us today. Thank you for your support from the first day of large-scale invasion. And of course, it's a privilege to address to all of you today. Over the past year, the United States has been an indispensable partner for us. Today, our relationship is entering a new phase, and we are transitioning from a paradigm of economic assistance to a paradigm of structured commercial investment and hard-nosed strategic alignment. And we are here to do business. We are here to offer you projects that can be implemented with Ukraine and in Ukraine, even during the wartime. We recognize and we respect the priorities of the U.S. administration. You seek for the strong partner who carry their own weight, who can offer the tangible returns on investment, and who secure American strategic interests abroad. Ukraine is exactly that kind of partner, and here is what the future of our bilateral business looks like. First of all is defense tech. The Silicon Valley of combat. We have forged the most battle-tested military industrial complex in the world, but we don't want to keep the technology and knowledge and experience just in Ukraine ourselves. We seek for joint ventures, we seek for the merger, for acquisition, for joint R&D with the American partners, and this is about securing Ukrainians' independence and our joint globally military supremacy. By integrating American capital with Ukrainian combat experience, we can create a new product that dominates global market. More importantly, it's ensured that the most advanced combat-proven military technologies remain firmly with our control, keeping them out of the hands of geopolitical rivals. So the second one is that energy dominance, US LNG and European security, and Ukraine is ready to be the largest new customer and logistic hub to American energy in Eastern Europe. We are strategically shifting away from the legacy system and committing to the purchase of American LNG. But we offer more than just a market. Ukraine possesses 31 billion cubic meters of underground storages, the largest in Europe. And by combining US LNG with Ukrainian storage and pipeline infrastructure, we can guarantee constant flow, price and stability and security of the entire European gas market. And we're ready to make the Transatlantic Energy Corridor a reality. The third one is I look at this table and look at DFC, so critical mineral deal and critical mineral and the reconstruction fund. The energy dominance and modern defense manufacturing require critical mineral. Currently, supply chains dangerously depends on adversaries. Ukraine holds vast resources of lithium, titanium, graphite, and through the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, we are offering American companies direct preferential access to develop these deposits. Investing in Ukrainian extraction is not just a good business, but it's a matter of securing the American supply chain for the 21st century. And the path to sustainable peace. I know all of you are looking for the swift end to the war, and for us as a top priority for our state, for our government. But I think that you should understand that Ukraine wants peace more than anyone. But as business leaders and policymakers, you know that entering negotiation without leverage leads a bad deal. A sustainable, lasting peace, one that comes with a legally binding security guarantees, requires maximum leverages. That's why maintaining and strictly enforcing sanctions against the Russian economy and systematically dismantling its shadow fleets is not an obstacle to peace, it's a prerequisite for long, just peace. And finally, while our partnership is grounded in mutual economic and security interests, it's elevated by our shared humanity. I want personally to say thank you to US State Department and to US Congress for the vital $25 million program dedicated to return of illegally deported Ukrainian children, and for your efforts to secure the release of our prisoners of war. So thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. And I just want to underline once again that Ukraine is open for American business. We are offering advanced defense technologies, massive energy infrastructure, and critical supply chains. And we are resilient, democratic partner, ready to share the burden of the global security. So let us build a partnership that drives economic growth in the United States, secure a lasting peace in Europe, and proves that the free enterprise and freedom itself and the strongest force on earth. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for your ongoing dialogue with the business community in Kyiv. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, it's great to see you, great to see many of you and your colleagues that are constantly working in Ukraine. We had a long dark, cold winter, but now we have spring. Spring is in the air, and the warmth that we feel. Suzanne, thank you to you and to all the team here at the US Chamber with Marjorie, Ivana, the whole team, and we really do appreciate that. This is this great family we have with the US Chamber and AmCham on the ground in Kyiv, our 600 members. Many of the members here today are the chair of our board, Lena Kosharny, having already $1.8 billion of assets under management in Ukraine, our vice chair, Alex McWhorter was Citibank on the ground, serving. I think most of you are really. And I think what we see is the phenomenal understanding of how does one do business during a full-scale war. And I think many business schools are coming to us to try to understand. And I think what we're seeing, this resilience of the companies operating today, but really getting ready for the future. This will be the biggest recovery, the biggest reconstruction of a nation in Europe since World War II. And that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're working on already today. And who better to work on this together? We're really delighted that everything's been going on with the US International Finance Development Corporation. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to invite on the stage the CEO of DFC, Ben Black.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you to the Chamber for convening us all here today. As one friend of freedom to another, I offer my greetings and congratulations to Prime Minister Svyrydenko and the entire Ukrainian delegation. Almost 1 year ago today, President Trump cemented the long-standing bond between our two countries when he announced a first-of-its-kind partnership for the reconstruction and long-term economic success of Ukraine. This historic agreement established the United States as an economic stakeholder in securing a free and peaceful future for a sovereign Ukraine. The team behind the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, or as it's often called, URIF, set an ambitious goal: to move from signed agreements to a fully operational investment fund by last year's end. From there, we raised the bar further, launching an investment portal, developing a robust and diverse pipeline, and announcing our inaugural investment just a few weeks ago. This is an extraordinary accomplishment, and I'm grateful to everybody who has worked tirelessly to meet and exceed every expectation, especially our Ukrainian partners. DFC is the international investment arm of the United States government and central to U.S. economic statecraft. A core tenet of our mission is to mobilize private capital in order to advance U.S. policy interests by investing in and alongside U.S. allies. Ukraine is exactly this type of partner. Ukraine is home to vast natural resources, including Europe's largest natural gas storage capacity. Its abundant deposits of critical minerals and deep reserves of hydrocarbons make it a pivotal player in the world economy of both today and tomorrow. Most importantly, it has an incredibly hardworking, highly educated workforce full of grit and resilience. The missing element is the full capital required to rebuild. That is the role that the DFC is uniquely positioned to fill. DFC has been active in Ukraine since the country's independence, and it has become one of our largest markets globally. While President Trump is working tirelessly to secure a lasting peace, DFC, along with our partners across the US government, is committed to rebuilding Ukraine's economy. That work is grounded in lessons drawn from the Marshall Plan, the United States' most ambitious and successful reconstruction effort in Europe. In March, Europe announced our first deal with Sign Engineering. Sign's visionary dual-use technology enables navigation and communication in environments where GPS is unavailable. It is critical to protecting Ukraine from drone attacks and a premier example of the capabilities required for the conflicts of tomorrow. And we're still just at the beginning. Our next priority will be advancing resilient and reliable sources of energy for Ukraine. Following a terrible winter and a wave of energy infrastructure attacks, it is clear that Ukraine's energy assets are critical, not only for Ukraine's continued recovery, but also for strengthening the broader energy security of Europe as a whole. As we speak, our teams are working with US, Ukrainian, and other international energy companies to source investments that will strengthen Ukraine's energy sector and protect it from external threats. Building an entity like Europe is something no agency has done before. For DFC, our investments represent more than just a financial return. They are an investment in Ukraine's future and in the enduring partnership between our nations. It is our deepest hope that this progress continues. We are proud to be part of this effort, and we remain committed to a lasting peace. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you to everybody for being here. My name is Ivana Zuzel. I am the Vice President of Europe here at the Chamber, and I lead the Chamber's Ukraine Business Initiative. I am really honored to be moderating today's panel on financing Ukraine's industrial recovery, and I am particularly honored to be joined by such distinguished guests. We have His Excellency Serhiy Marchenko, the Minister of Finance of Ukraine. I believe this is your third time participating in this forum, so we're really delighted to be able to welcome you back. We have Auksa Yurkuta, International Strategic Initiatives at Bank of America, Stephanie von Friedenberg, Global Head of Public Sector Group at Citi, and of course Connor Coleman, Head of Investments at the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, DFC. Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction needs remain enormous. I believe the latest World Bank estimates place it at over $580 billion over the next decade. And everybody in this room understands that public resources alone will be far from sufficient. Large-scale private capital has to play a central role, but thus far, that capital deployment remains limited. There's certainly been progress on some of the de-risking tools like war risk insurance, targeted government and IFI programs, but the mechanisms are still small relative to both the current and the projected need. And they haven't tipped the market towards sustained investment. We're seeing more recently some calculated projects by strategic and corporate investors, areas like mining, banking, energy, agriculture, industrial production, and I think these deals show what is possible, but they've largely bypassed financial investors. So I think the core question for this panel is, how do we get the private sector doing the work now to prepare the pipelines, the structures, and the confidence so that private capital can move at scale in Ukraine. And I'm really pleased to have this group to help us unpack how that happens. So, Minister Marchenko, perhaps I can turn to you first. Can you set the scene for us on what is the current growth in the Ukrainian economy? What are the labor dynamics? What is the budget sufficiency? And what are your negotiations with IMF this week?
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here again. It's a great meeting to be with our friends and partners, to collaborate again, to discuss some very critical issues for Ukraine reconstruction. And your first questions related to our current stage, where we are right now. So we are struggling. This is a struggle of survivability. Either our economy is stronger or Russia economy is stronger. So we try to compete in this particular endeavor. And it's not an easy. Specifically, last winter was very difficult for us because Russia targeted specifically our infrastructure, heating facilities, and it's influenced our business environment. Definitely people and business suffered, and they channel some of their resources for us limited to deploy additional generators facility to find some ways to survive. But I won't tell you for sure. Our business is resilient. Our people are well capable to survive and to adapt to any harsh possible situations. And despite the possible decline in GDP growth in first quarter this year, we feel signals of recovery. Specifically, if you're talking about revenue mobilization is strong. In the first quarter this year, we collected $500 million more in comparison with our initial targets. It means that business are capable not only to operate, but to also to be able to pay taxes. Of course, now the big challenge is inflation. We see some consequences of Middle East crisis and oil price spike on the economy of Ukraine, and in recent inflation is surging to 7.9%. And I believe that our National Bank of Ukraine are doing their best to make it under control, but it's still a challenge. So all in all, our situation is difficult, but we are able to overcome these difficulties. And I hope that successful resolution of European loan for Ukraine rather sooner than later help us to boost additional investment and incentives towards Ukraine. So time is difficult, but it's already 5th year so far. So what could you expect? But we realize ourselves that we are able and capable to live even in such conditions. And in a battlefield, there are no possibility for us to lose this war. It's a question what we can calculate, how it's mean for us winning this war, or what for Ukrainian, a fair peace for Ukraine. But we haven't have any chance to lose this war. And of course, we have some difficulties, but our economy is strong, and I believe we have very good and further ahead prosperity.
Thank you, Minister. You know, we've been doing this forum since 2023. And I think a running theme every year has been, it's a difficult moment, but the resilience is extraordinary. And every year that we've done the forum, we have seen new innovation, new sectors coming online in Ukraine, even under extremely challenging circumstances. Connor, I'm going to turn to you. I'm not going to go sort of fully down the line. You're leading investments at DFC, including under the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, formally launched last year. the fund has announced a first portfolio of investment-ready projects, including in energy and mining, and confirmed an investment in a dual-use emerging technology. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about both of those in our next two panels. But I wanted to ask you what types of investments, sectors, segments, priorities in Ukrainian industry are finance-ready or bankable today, and what's standing in the way of moving some of those viable projects?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you very much for having us here today, and honored to be up here with such distinguished colleagues speaking about this important issue. The benefit about speaking after your boss is it makes your job easy in highlighting the sectors that we are going to be covering. So look, I would say from a sector perspective of how we're thinking about our pipeline regarding the fund, we have reviewed to date over 200 different investment submissions coming in with sectors such as energy, infrastructure, emerging technology, so critical minerals as well. So those are kind of the focus areas that we're starting with the fund. So those are going to be the key sectors that we see that you can actively invest in projects now. Of those 200 submissions too, I would say there's like an active pipeline of over 50 that we're moving forward and like looking to go into screening and diligence with. So the theme and the moral of the story is there are projects that are bankable and ready in Ukraine today. I think the key to unlocking that right now is how do you get additional private sector dollars into it? So obviously our goal with the fund is to continue to announce investments and make investments within it, but then another target of the fund that we're going to be looking towards this year is how do you establish co-investment vehicles for these key sectors to bring in not only development finance institutions, but sovereign wealth funds, alternative asset managers, banking partners as well, to amplify what the fund is doing within Ukraine. I think during a period of conflict, the key is how do you provide stability, or as much stability to the investment? Because at the end of the day, the private sector needs to make the return. That's what they're going for in order to deploy capital. And I think that is the benefit of the partnership with the Ukrainian government with the fund, is this provides as much stability as possible in a conflict today. We have a great working relationship with our Ukrainian colleagues. I know the teams talk daily regarding it. So when it comes to active portfolio management for the life of these investments, we're very committed to being those active partners, being the bridge between the government and the private sector, because as these problems arise, and there always will be issues that arise, we'll be able to work through it together to make sure the private sector is able to get the return and the protection they need to invest now in Ukraine.
Thank you, and I have to say we're really grateful to the DFC, not just for your work with government partners, but how much engagement and enthusiasm we have seen from your entire team towards the private sector, especially over these last few months on Ukraine. I think those types of partnerships will be really critical in moving some of these key questions forward. Switching to the private sector, Stephanie, Citi has been in Ukraine for over 20 years and has remained on the ground throughout the war, expanding your balance sheet exposure, advising multinational clients operating in country. Where do you see credible near-term opportunities and any frictions that are preventing projects from advancing to execution?
So Ivana, first, thanks for the invitation and thanks for recognizing that we've been on the ground for 28 years. I think from the very top of the house at Citi, Ukraine matters, and the reconstruction really matters to us as a firm. When I actually look at the data, so the $588 billion you mentioned, 2/3 of that is concentrated in 5 sectors only. So energy, housing, commerce, logistics. And when we look at those, I think the question we need to ask ourselves is realistically, where is there immediate opportunity? I think we see it in maybe 4 sectors, and it echoes a lot of what you said, Connor. First is energy. Why energy? Well, there's been a lot of destruction, so there's a lot of opportunity to reconstruct, but there's also the ability to make interesting reforms quickly. And there's also the opportunity to put revenue-generating assets on the ground in the form of renewables, grids, and storage relatively quickly. The second area, and the Prime Minister said it this morning, is defense and defense tech. It's the Silicon Valley of defense, and I don't have to look any further than the Gulf. And where did the Gulf call for help when they needed help on drone technology? They went to Ukraine. And we have already onboarded several of these drone and technology companies, and will continue to do so because we see a lot of M&A opportunity there. The third is manufacturing, which you mentioned, and in the western part of the country, we are seeing opportunity in food processing, agri-processing, and construction materials, which are going to be needed to rebuild the housing sector, so those are very interesting opportunities. And finally, telecom and tech. And the telecom and tech business has been invested in throughout the war, has created a lot of export opportunity, and there are opportunities today just sitting there waiting for investment. But you asked the hard question is kind of what are the constraints? And I would say there's probably 5. And the first one really is peace and security. Investors are looking for the war to end. So that's a given, and we all know that. But I think that remains at the top of the house. The second is human capital. So there's been mobilization. There are people who have left the country. There's mental health issues. All of these things are issues that our employers in Ukraine need to contend with, investors need to think about as they move into the country. And then there's bankability, and are there enough bankable projects, and what are the regulatory frictions to making those happen? And then finally, and maybe most importantly, we're talking about $588 billion of investment. That's 3 times the Ukrainian GDP of 2025. The capacity in the country to absorb that amount of investment in any given year, I think, is going to be a challenge moving forward.
Thank you for that. And I think we'll actually touch upon all of the things that you have raised. But Auksa, I want to turn to you. You've been actually doing advisory work for the Ukrainian Ministry of Economy over the last couple of years, bringing investments to Ukraine and pushing corporates to have their Ukraine strategy ready. Getting financial investors to be looking seriously at projects has been challenging. From your perspective, why is that the case, and why are investors not preparing for a moment when they'll be ready to deploy money at the end of the war?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. So as you said, Bank of America has been providing advisory service to the Ministry of Economy for the last few years. And we've seen the tremendous work that the government has been doing, the huge learning curve that they have been achieving, and the resilience of not just the government, but the whole business community around. I think when I think about investments, I think of it in 3 buckets. There's the corporates, international corporates that have been in Ukraine. There's the other corporates that have been looking at Ukraine but not present, and then there's the financial investors. The companies that have been in Ukraine, I cannot think of anybody who actually has not increased their investment in Ukraine. Now, again, they are concentrated in certain sectors, agriculture, equipment, energy sector, but all of these companies have actually taken the opportunity to another level, even though the risks clearly exist there. Maybe in the beginning there was a bit of, where do we actually put our staff, where do we put our people, how do we provide security to them? But from a business perspective, most of them have actually increased investments. For me, in the near term, the biggest opportunity are international companies that do not have presence in Ukraine. And I think that's really sort of the area where we're focusing on and trying to engage with companies that basically, if you think about Ukraine, it's a 30+ million consumer market, first and foremost, right? Secondly, it's geographic positioning, the resilience of the human capital, what's available there, and then the whole range of natural resources that is there, that in normal conditions are actually a fraction of the cost for production that would be required. So our focus has really been on the corporates. We are also spending quite a bit of time on the privatization program and the assets that are there, because I think it's almost easier in certain cases to be convincing these companies to be looking at Ukraine and to be looking at an asset that may be present there already, but needs quite a bit of transformation, needs quite a bit of investment, needs quite a bit of growth to a completely different level, but getting new companies into Ukraine that have not been present. I think the financial investors has been the most challenging one, and it goes to a lot of the issues that you have raised. And as Connor said, ultimately it's all about the financial returns and what you can get, taking the risks into consideration. I do believe that the biggest opportunity with financial investors is to be following the corporates that will be coming into Ukraine, that will be taking on projects, and getting them alongside to be providing the additional capital for Ukraine to be mobilizing there. Some of it is going to come with the support of DFC, other development banks alongside to again provide that additional security. But most of our time now is spent with corporates to be looking at assets that may be available, to be looking at some of the greenfield projects as well, and then trying to get financial investors to at least be spending time and understanding what the opportunities are. We know very well that as soon as there's some sort of a resolution, everybody's going to be saying, okay, what do I do, right? How do I make money in Ukraine? How do I invest in Ukraine? And yes, the amounts are enormous, but it's trying to get people to actually do the preparation work, do the homework before that, so that when the risk factors of peace and security are available, they know exactly which projects they want to be coming along. So again, focus now is, especially with the privatization program that's coming on board, that will be quite important in terms of generating revenues for the state, but most importantly, actually putting these assets into hands of experts, into strategic corporates that will be able to be taking them to a different level, to a different capex and investment programs, and then getting financial investors to come along those corporates.
Thank you, and we'll come back to the privatization question in a little bit. But Minister Marchenko, I wonder if I can turn to you and ask about the defense sector. I think that's certainly the one that is receiving most media attention over the last few weeks, and it has become a significant part of Ukraine's economy. How do you see its contribution to the overall GDP, to employment, to effects on the budget, and sort of as a model for what is possible both in Ukraine, but also in Ukraine's work with international partners?
Yes, I think that our industrial sector, one of the most fast-growing sector of economy right now because of great demand from our military. And for example, in 2022, all of our defense industries can produce up to 1 billion production. Now the output is could be this year around 55. So the growth is very huge. It's very, and the tempo of this growth is also very, very important to admit. And if we're talking our budget figures, it's also very significantly channeled towards our domestic industries. Mm-hmm. And only this year we plan to spend $25 billion from our budget to procure necessary drones and other necessary weapons and equipment for our army. It means that it's not only demand-driven economy, but it's also economy which have a good chances to survive even after the war because of great demand, because some of this technology can be applied in different other sectors. For example, agro sectors, different high-tech technologies can be used in different fields, not only public but also private. And I believe that it's a definitely game changer for all of us because of interest for Ukrainian defense industries. We feel this interest, but now it's a question how to make it possible to attract important investment, because investment is quite significant part of the potential for growth, and to make it possible to bring this potential to Ukraine's economy. And I want to tell you one important element which you shouldn't miss, that the essence of technology without practicality or practical usage in the battlefield, without experience can be obsolete. And some drones which were used our army by last year, now it's totally obsolete, we are not using them. That means that combination of combat experience, which our army possesses together with experience on production of drones and new technologies, gives us immense opportunities. So I would like you all to think broader, not only about procurement of some products, but procurement of whole services. And it's a message for practically all countries, probably the most important for European ones, because they trying to secure their borders, and for them to procure the whole service from Ukraine will benefit much in comparison with just technology. Because technology can evolve, can be obsolete, but experience and the opportunity to apply it is something we really possess, and this is the value of Ukraine's current economy.
Thank you. I think Ukraine has proven that it can operate under extraordinary economic pressure, not to speak of security pressures. So I think the question is now, how can today's choices begin turning Ukraine's resilience into repeatable investment? And Connor, from your perspective, what can change even during the war for private capital to move from selective deals to sustained large-scale investment?
Yeah, I would like to bifurcate this by a couple of different sectors. With the easiest to kind of focus on to start is the defense sector and the emerging technology sector. Obviously, that's getting most of the attention nowadays, and for good reason, because investors are always going to go to technology, experience, innovation they do not possess. And that is something that the defense sector offers right now to investors worldwide. Given this conflict going on, Ukraine has unique experience, technology, innovation that no other country has. That is always going to attract private capital, no matter the risk profile at the end of the day. Now, from Ukraine's side, it's very important to choose what private sector partners are going to be good stewards of those investments at the end of the day, who are going to be long-term partners in aid in the reconstruction overall. So I think from that standpoint, defense sector is unique within Ukraine because private capital, that's probably the easiest to mobilize private capital into right now during conflict. When I think about some of the other critical sectors, energy, infrastructure, critical minerals, agriculture, commerce, that are absolutely needed now, how do you manage that investment thesis during a period of conflict? I go back to stability. And I think of stability through two ways. I think to start, in order to really get private sector there, development finance institutions and private sector partners who have the ability to offer political risk insurance and guarantees, that is going to be a big component of actually getting private sector dollars in now, because that is a very high level form of stability. Those are going to be two co-investment vehicles we're going to be looking to establish alongside the Ukraine Reconstruction Fund to help aid some of that investment now. And then I couldn't agree more. It's the knowledge, it's the diligence, it's the how do you do the work now in those sectors to be ready for when that conflict arises. And that's exactly why we put so much time and effort in establishing best-in-class underwriting practices within the Ukraine Reconstruction Fund. That's why we have a full team within the DFC and the Ukrainian government working night and day on these investments, because we offer a first screen. We're going to be doing the work on the ground now for the private sector and be willing to share the information. We're not going to be able to do every investment, but we're going to be able to look and assess multiple different investments across multiple different sectors to give that private sector the head start. So we obviously, why we brought Alvarez and Marcel as a financial advisor, we want the private sector to be doing the work now with us, but we can start now to make sure we have everything kind of ready to go for the private sector when that conflict does end.
And Stephanie, I would like to sort of pose a similar question to you. How do we move beyond these selective transactions towards some larger scale investment in industrial recovery? What factors are influencing those decisions today? What is working? And what can meaningfully alter the calculus?
Meaningfully alter the calculus, I think, is the key, Ivana. First of all, I think we've got to think of the reconstruction not as one big mega project, but a portfolio of varying opportunities. And when I look back at my 30-some years of experience doing this kind of work, it really tells me that we need projects that demonstrate the art of the possible, because people need to see what can be done and what kind of returns can be brought from Ukraine today. How do we do that? It's a massive undertaking. There's not enough public money. There's not enough private money. And I think Connor said it really well earlier. There needs to be collaboration between the public and the private. And I would say kind of starting around three areas. So first, before the war, the Ukrainians were developing a very sophisticated, state-of-the-art public-private partnership reform. And I think we can pick up on that, and we can use those PPP frameworks for hospitals, transportation, schools. Then we really need to encourage all of the inbound investment to think about leveraging the relationships they have with the EBRD, the EIB, the IFC, the DFC. This is taxpayer money that's been put for the very purpose of de-risking projects, and they can really help drive that demonstration effect. Third, I would really like to encourage the development institutions to think about Ukraine as a hotbed for product innovation. So instead of just saying there's a guarantee, can we have a gradated or tilted guarantee that says you get a higher guarantee the further east in the country you go? Can we think about blended finance that does a very similar thing, gives more blending to the investments in the country that are further east than west? Because today people are far more interested in investing in the western part of the country. There's caveats to that. So first, private capital is not going to flow at the rate we want it to without certain economic reforms. And we really need to think about those reforms as investments into the future of Ukraine. EU accession is not just a geopolitical nice to have, it's actually a credit enhancing opportunity for the country. Second, I think we have to remember the private sector isn't going to touch everything, and there will need to be public money reserved for the things the private sector can't touch. But if we get it right and we really think about not a funding gap problem, but the challenge is really reconstructing capital stacks that make sense for where the investment is in the country, we really believe that somewhere between $4 and $5 billion of development institutional capital can attract somewhere between $20 and $50 billion over the course of the next 10 years. That's the demonstration that we need.
Thank you. Alex, I said I was going to come back on the privatization question. The Ukrainian government has set out a significant privatization program. The proceeds would also be partially deployed to the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. How ready are some of those assets for privatization, and how can we get more investor engagement into that process?
Yeah, so very good question. I think I want to start by saying that this is a government that is extremely open to all the input, right? And the reforms and what they have done in the last many years, but especially in the last 4 years of war, are truly, truly incredible. And this is a government that engages, that listens, and in certain ways definitely is, working the huge reform package for the EU accession, but even beyond that, and actually in certain cases even teaches EU different way of looking at things. So I think that engagement with the government is extremely important, and knowing that they are very much open to suggestions, that they're very much open to how things should be done, how things should be approached is a very important factor, because that direct engagement with the government, I think there's very few countries that exists in. Secondly, the government is also very practical about the fact that a huge portion of the economy is state-owned, but at the same time realizing that in many of these assets, probably the government is not the best owner of them or not the most optimal operator of those assets, in the sense that a lot of these sectors need quite significant investment and transformation. And the ability to be able to deploy that capital, given all the other needs that are there, is limited. And therefore, these assets being managed in private hands are actually going to enhance them quite significantly and generate quite a bit more of tax revenue for the state ultimately. The government, again, is also very specific about what's on the privatization program, how they want to space it out time-wise, which assets are going to be strategic, but even in those strategic assets, still giving a possibility of a portion of those assets being either listed or sold, minority stakes, and very much appreciating the fact that, again, once it gets into the private hands, it probably will be run and will be operated more efficiently and ultimately will generate better returns for the state as well. What I think is missing a bit, and that's where we're trying to be helpful, is making sure that the strategic corporates in those particular sectors know about these assets, are educated about them, and are spending the time on them. So in the near-time privatization, there's a number of banks, there's an alumina processing facility, there's a ammonia processing facility, there are a number of greenfield projects in CRMs and in gas fields. And so it's making sure that the particular operators in those areas actually know about these assets, right? One of the most recent processes was a Chernomorsk port concession. And again, making sure that all the global ports are being approached, that the infrastructure funds know that this is happening, and that there's more work that is being done on actually creating these partnerships, creating that formation sort of capital between a strategic who will be the operator, the financial investor, and some de-risking possibility that could be coming from DFIs or other sovereign sources. But the program is quite significant. There are a number of opportunities, and we're trying to be helpful to the government in making sure that these assets are being marketed in advance. Also, the Ukrainian government has been extremely transparent about how these processes are being run. Most of them are being done as auctions, but all the homework that goes into the marketing and the preparation before those auctions, as well as qualifying certain buyers based on their expertise, their capital commitments, their ability to be able to be investing and taking these assets to what they need, is quite significant amount that is being done. And again, I think in many cases it's trying to find that combination of a strategic operator with a financial investor that will be able to provide that capital that will be needed, because most of these assets will actually need quite a bit of investment. I keep on going to the fact that, again, we've got a huge consumer market. We have a very different cost structure in terms of cost of production, both from human capital costs as well as all the resources that are available, and then the geographic positioning. And as Stephanie alluded, that possibility of, again, EU accession on whatever time frame you may think that it's feasible, but that access to the EU and more global market is what gives the advantage to a lot of these assets. The government has also been very specific. It's not about maximizing the proceeds from these assets. And again, with an understanding that because they need quite a bit of investment, because they need quite a bit of development, that what those assets are going to be generating in private ownership will be beneficial, will come back in the tax revenues for the country, rather than maximizing that initial revenues that will be coming from the actual privatizations.
Thank you. And building on that question, Minister Marchenko, looking beyond reconstruction, how are you thinking about today's financing structures and how they're laying a foundation for a more competitive or resilient or integrated Ukrainian industrial economy over the next decade?
Thank you, Ivana, for these questions. I would like to admit that we still fighting to establish some tools and facilities, and we, to be honest with you, at initial stage on facilities which is necessary for reconstruction, and I welcome incentive from the United States to establish funds which can attract investment. I am welcoming any other incentive specifically from European Union to establish a similar fund which crowdfund some government particular money, and to establish some mechanisms which help to risk share current structures and to compensate some war-related risk, political risks. We still haven't have clear structures which gives a window for any investment in Ukraine to come, what they can expect, what can be coverage. And I believe this is something we should work together on, and because the practice of different other countries, post-conflict countries, has shown that only combination of public and private money can be a driver for future success. And I believe that without any humiliation of our support, we're really grateful for money which comes to Ukraine, specifically to budget, but I believe that it's an intermediate period, and we need to think about what we can do if we haven't have any access to the public money, what private investment can come, and we should think now how to multiply existing facilities, existing capacities with public money, and to provide bigger multiplier for big investment to come to Ukraine. And of course, from our perspective as a government, we did our best to facilitate business environment in Ukraine. We compensate political risk and compensate interest rate for business to operate in Ukraine. We did it for several stages. We have this program in our budget, specifically due to the fact that all war-related risks linked to damages, to energy shortages, etc., government tries to compensate and create some kind of environment for business, at least to survive. But to be honest with you, it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. So we need these bigger facilities, bigger funds, which can attract investment, which can be in a more significant and broader base.
Thank you. Connor, how are you thinking about how public finance can be structured to really crowd in private capital rather than just de-risk it? I think DFC is doing a lot of really fascinating work on Ukraine that could potentially be the model for the agency as it looks globally. But what has also worked globally that can be a model for Ukraine, and what still needs to change?
Given, I think, Ben and mine's background in the private sector as more so structured investors, I think we're big believers that the first thing you need to do for every investment is listen. Understand what the needs of the project are, understand what the public entity is trying to achieve and what the private sector is looking to return and gain for, and like where is their appetite across the capital structure. I think the biggest thing institutions like DFC can do is then be the part of the capital structure that pencils and makes everything work. That sometimes is in the senior secured lending position, that sometimes is in the equity, that sometimes is in a mezzanine structured position in the middle of the capital structure. And that's sometimes doing insurance or guarantees. Every investment is unique, it's bespoke, it has different parties involved. So I really think it takes institutions like the DFC to be flexible capital providers, understand where the appetite is for that given investment, and then change our ability in our financing solutions to fit that project, as opposed to just be offering one-stop, types of financial products for every investment. So I think it's more work on us, but I think that's what necessarily is needed to bridge the public-private gap for a lot of these capital structures.
Thank you. Stephanie, when you think about the private sector, how can it be more actively, more effectively engaged in considering how to optimize coordination, prioritization of assistance, including financial assistance and programs for Ukraine?
Yeah. So first, I know it's been said, but the magnitude of investment is staggering. And sadly, in this geopolitical environment, I don't see a Marshall Plan for Ukraine coming. So the question is, we need massive amounts of private capital. That's not inevitable. And I really do believe that the private sector is not capable of self-selecting at the system level to coordinate. We really need the leadership of the public sector, and I think the DFC is doing a great job demonstrating how that can be done, to bring the development institutions to be the bridge between the public and the private. If they can do that, this is what the private sector can bring to Ukraine. So first, they really can reinvigorate the economy. So think about investing in new sectors and new companies that will ultimately generate jobs, increase productivity, and create economic growth. And the spill-on effect for that in Ukraine will be, there'll be jobs for refugees to come back to. There'll be jobs and ways in which they can reintegrate the military and the soldiers into the economy, and it can create domestic stability. And finally, I think that the inbound foreign direct investment can also help guide infrastructure investment. They have the ability to take long-dated assets. They have the asset managers that know how to build and run these kind of infrastructure projects, and they're going to be revenue accretive very early on in the process. So with a partnership between the development institutions and the private sector, I think that's the way that you get the private sector engaged the fastest and bring their skill sets to help the economy rejuvenate itself.
Thank you. There's been a couple of mentions of necessary reforms, including thinking about reforms as investment in Ukraine's future. Auksa, how do you think Ukraine should think about sequencing some of those reforms and transactions to create early deals, which in turn drive confidence from much larger pools of private capital to follow?
Yeah. So look, I think again, the work that has been done on reforms, it's honestly staggering. And again, I come from a former Soviet Union republic, so watching what Ukraine has achieved in this time period, how open they are to, again, getting to EU standards, getting to international standards, and really transforming a number of sectors it's truly remarkable. I think the one part that still needs quite a lot of work is just capital market structure, the whole sort of securities paradigm, and that is being worked on, and sort of again in the priority of things, and being able to get the time from the government to be able to be structuring it. That's in the works, and I think that will still be quite important. But even again to the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, what they have been able to achieve with the currency controls, with capital flows, the changes that you have been able to make even in the last year and a half of being able to start freeing some of it up within the constraints of again what you're operating in is truly remarkable. I think again right now what's missing is there is a very long list of projects. What's missing is actually partners being able to just do proper feasibility financial work on those projects, and being able to get them to the stage where they can say, okay, this is how much public capital we need, this is where the private capital can be coming in, and these are the returns that they're going to be making, and then crowding in. I still believe that a lot of these projects will need a corporate strategic partner to be driving them, to be doing a lot of this work and analysis and making that initial investment. And that's, again, the goal of educating companies in energy, in minerals, in mining, in energy production, in renewables, in machinery manufacturing, overall educating companies to actually be looking at possibilities and opportunities in Ukraine. And then having financial partners just doing the analysis of figuring out, again, how do you stack it up? What's the need for the public capital? Where the private capital can be coming in and what returns they would be making? And then again, trying to find any guarantee or other de-risking products to come with it, to be able to be getting some of that capital in at the current stages. The opportunity is huge, but it is the countering it with the risks that are prevalent at the moment, and giving that capacity to the government to actually be doing the real feasibility studies on a lot of these projects, and getting them to the stage where you can start having conversations with private capital in particular of this is how the stacking would work, this is how the returns would work, this is what the time frame looks like, and at the same time taking into consideration that the risks that are still prevalent there.
Thank you so much. And since we have a couple of extra minutes, which almost never happens on a panel, I hope that you'll forgive me for putting you all on the spot with just a couple of last rapid-fire questions. So in one sentence, to the extent that that is possible, Minister Marchenko, maybe if I can start with you, what are you most optimistic about over the near term, so over the next couple of months, in terms of opportunities for private capital in Ukraine?
Well, people who despite all of the challenges, live in Ukraine are very optimistic. Because despite all of these hardships, constant missiles attacks, even today it was, believe me, it was very harsh to live in Ukraine. But despite all of this, we choose to stay in Ukraine, we choose to be in Ukraine, and I believe that Ukraine could be a good destiny for future country which other people would like to live and to invest in Ukraine, because we have survived. I believe we will survive this war, and I believe after this war we will be a little bit different. We better understand the world. We better understand what's our role in this world, what our competitive advantages in this world, what we can provide for our European colleagues, what we can do together with our European colleagues to build better future, build better European future. And this is something which encouraged me and personally our team, people in Ukraine, to work hard, to stay, to pay taxes, and to wait when the time comes to work for better.
Thank you. Oksa, what gives you cause for optimism?
So again, a lot of the things that you said, but again, doing this work has given the best perspective on life to me, because again, our problems are not problems, right? And I think we need to keep that, and we need to keep on thinking again, how can we be supporting? I think the innovation that is coming out of Ukraine is just, it's beyond belief. A few weeks ago, there were 16 Ukrainian defense tech companies that came through the US on roadshow to 6 different cities, and they each talked about their technologies. And it's not just, and again, most of these companies did not exist 3 years ago. And some of them are $1 billion plus revenues now. It's not just the fact that there's sort of these drones are being created, these technologies are being created, but also that a lot of the components are actually being created and manufactured in Ukraine. And when you think about how much goes into a drone or interceptor, that a lot of it actually, that reliance is actually being done in Ukraine itself. That innovation to me gives a tremendous amount of hope, and I honestly think not just from a security perspective, what's happening on the battlefield, but overall, we in Europe, in the world, we can learn so much from the Ukrainian people, and that's definitely the optimistic part for me.
Thank you. Stephanie.
So I would actually say 2 things. First, the resilience of the Ukrainian people. And if you look at city staff on the ground, what they have had to do over the course of the last 4 years is phenomenal. And they continue to support city, our franchise, and the country. And I think that speaks volumes because they really do believe it's an existential crisis of their country. And that bodes well for the future in terms of coming out of the war. And the second is defense and defense technology. And it's for all the reasons that you said, but I also think it's because it's forward-looking. It's building a future economy that can reward both Ukraine, the Europeans, and the world writ large as we move into a more bifurcated geopolitical environment where defense is going to be more and more important in terms of governmental budgets. And I just, as soon as the war ends, I think both of those things will really bode well for Ukraine.
Thank you, Stephanie. Connor.
Well, first, guys, you all cheated. She said 1 sentence, and you all gave very
I know. We'll give you 2.
For me, I'm going to go with partnership. At the end of the day, when you boil down to what business really is, it's trusting your partners. And I think the ground in Ukraine is fertile for this. I think what Ukraine has been able to achieve during the war and kind of all of the reforms over the past multiple years has really laid kind of that ground of trusting relationship. And we've seen that at the DFC with our partnership with Europe. I think there is a lot of appetite and trust with private sector interest right now of wanting to come into Ukraine, just figuring out what that right solution is. So I think partnership is what is making me really optimistic about the future.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I would just say, I remember doing this forum, the first forum in 2023, and I think a lot of the conversation then was really focused on a post-war future. At that moment, we were still talking about a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. We're here 3 years later, still a very difficult security situation, but an enormous amount of progress has been made. And every year, when I think about even this panel and some of the issues that are raised, I think last year we spoke a lot about de-risking. There's progress on building out these tools, and it is thanks to the partnerships between the private sector and the public sector. So I hope that some of the things that we raised today, we can look in the rearview mirror next year at this forum and say, well, we did a terrific job of shifting the needle forward. What's the next thing on the agenda? And with that, please join me in thanking all of our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Okay, I know you're all scooting around a little bit, getting some more coffee and what have you, but you got to be a little bit better, more engaged than that. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. We're excited to move on to the next panel here and focus on the energy and critical minerals conversation for the U.S.-Ukraine Partnership Forum here today. And I'm really delighted to have a powerhouse panel with us today. Let me take just a couple of minutes to introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right into the conversation. Just to my right, Ambassador Martina Strong, who's currently the regional president with Bechtel for the Middle East and Central Europe. Brings long experience in both the Middle East and Central Europe in her diplomatic days. In fact, the last time we met was in UAE while you were serving as ambassador, and of course in France as well. So thank you for being here. Roger Martella is the Chief Corporate Officer for GE Vernova, and again, thank you for your company chairing the U.S. UAE Business Initiative. For those of you who have been around Washington at all, you've likely worked with Roger along the way in his capacity both at U.S. EPA and Department of Justice, and a lot of work since then. And just from a personal point, I would say from the friendship and partnership we've had with him here at the Chamber. Audrey Robertson is the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Critical Minerals and Energy Innovation. Again, we're very fortunate to have someone with a deep background in investment and corporate governance, entrepreneurship, worked in a lot of different types of energy projects and companies, from oil and gas to batteries and solar and geothermal. So great to have you as part of this conversation as well. And of course, we have the Deputy Minister of Economy, Yeger Perlegin. Deputy Minister of Economy, Environment, and Agriculture. Again, someone else that comes to us with a deep experience in investment, mining, and energy across Ukraine and throughout his career. So great opportunity for us to focus on the reconstruction, recovery, modernization efforts in Ukraine. I think we all know how critical both energy and critical minerals are to the future of Ukraine. So I wanted to start, Assistant Secretary, with you and get your from your position with critical minerals and energy innovation, how you see the U.S.-Ukraine partnership, how that can translate the developing strategic alignment between U.S. and between critical minerals and energy security into a more kind of durable commercial supply chains that benefit both the Ukraine economy and the U.S. economy.
Oh, thank you for the question. Thank you for inviting us to be here today at the Department of Energy and including me in that. So I appreciate the forum you brought together. Building any sort of critical mineral energy infrastructure, energy project is generally a long-term capital investment that is well suited for intergovernmental partnership. As it relates to the United States and our partnership with Ukraine, they are a component of our Forge Compact, which includes many nations and allies around the world, because solving the critical mineral challenge today is not about just doing it alone. It's about doing it with others, because the supply chain for critical minerals starts with the resource, but that's not where it ends. The whole step of processing, refining, metallurgy, and actually turning into product is an engagement across many nations. I see our close relationship with Ukraine as an opportunity to both leverage the technology we're developing here in the United States, our leadership in new and novel ways to not just refine, but understand where the resource is, understand and deploy new mining technologies. When we can do that here in the United States, that's great. When we can do it with our allies and partner nations around the world, we all win. And that's not just for mining, it's for refining, processing, metals, frankly, all the way through to motors and magnets and other forms of industrialization. So we look forward to continuing the strong partnership with Ukraine and other allied nations as they build their supply chains out.
Excellent. Well, speaking of that partnership, Minister, let me turn to you next. And again, not only from the posture of your position now, but the experience you've had over the last many years throughout your career, in country. How do you see Ukraine prioritizing and sequencing the different energy and mineral projects to align with U.S. partners? But then also, how can that coordination help accelerate the delivery and integration of supply chains, in the transatlantic supply chains here?
Well, I just want to say that, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful question. Thank you for the wonderful comments, and thank you for the invitation. In terms of the actual basis of what we have to solve, it's actually as simple as, solving the predicament of the midstream. I believe that Ukraine has its strongest capabilities and points not only in the upstream resourcing and actually mining, but it's actually solving what I call the midstream predicament. One of the key problems that we are seeing today, if we take, for example, such a key value chain and supply chain as titanium, we're seeing, for example, that titanium sponge is a zero. Basically, how many production sites do you know in Europe for titanium sponge? Zero. The United States of America at the moment is also not a manufacturer or producer of titanium sponge. We believe that Ukraine, with its strong history and backing in the hydrometallurgical processes, in actually very, very capable feedstock and very, very capable deposits, can actually help solve such predicaments. And by actually, tackling the problem by prioritizing what our most strategic ally needs, and by looking at the supply chain through a kind of a prism of a constant, a constant regular supply chain analysis, we have a chance to actually target those 3 to 5 to 7 key elements that need unlocking. And when we unlock the key core elements, for example, like titanium, like lithium, like graphite, a lot of these have inherent byproducts that follow on. You would not be able to extract regularly simple byproducts. They would not be economically feasible. So the idea is you attach them and you extract them as a byproduct in a core process. So we can offer that, and the idea is that we tackle, like I said, 3, 5, 7 key priorities, and then we unlock more. And the key idea behind that is that you sequence that with energy-related projects, because we're talking about some of the most energy-intensive and chemically intensive processes that are known to man at the moment. So the logic is sequence them, prioritize firsthand, and then sequence your 2 lines of development, and you can get there. The idea is that you don't want to push something you do not have. So the idea is leverage what Ukraine already has, and Ukraine has that capacity in titanium, graphite, lithium, and some other very, very core minerals and metals that are needed today.
Blessed with great resources there, and obviously huge opportunities. Roger, let's dive a little more onto the energy side of this. GE Vernova, of course, is a global leader in power and grid technology. So I want to ask you what you see as the most critical needs today in Ukraine's electricity sector. I mean, across generation, transmission, grid management, and how do those needs need to evolve as Ukraine modernizes its own system and helps to integrate with the broader European system?
Well, Marty, thank you. And thank you again for the Chamber's leadership today. This morning's already been about optimism for the future and building a strong Ukraine, from the Prime Minister to DFC to our former panel, which was a great public-private partnership panel. But the one thing that connects all of it is energy. And I think you heard it from the Prime Minister, like energy is really the lifeblood of enabling all these things to happen, from critical minerals to economic development to prosperity for people and even safety and security. And so we have to take super seriously our role in helping Ukraine, in partnership with the United States, build that lifeblood, that building block for what they need to achieve all these goals. And I have to say, as a company that was founded by Thomas Edison, I've said it before on this stage, we are in awe of what Ukraine has done managing their grid. We have a lot to learn from them and how they have managed it so creatively to keep the lights on, to keep the heat going in these most challenging of circumstances. But what we're seeing in Ukraine when it comes to energy, it's a balance, it's a game of both stability and flexibility. And normally these two things don't go together, I think we know. But first and foremost is stability. Ukraine is not where it needs to be, and we all regret this, in terms of providing that base load energy to provide the heat, to get through the winter so everybody feels safe and secure, the children, the vulnerable, and so on. And so we are working every day to bring that stability, to bring that base load energy, to prepare for the next winter, and that is job number one. A lot of it is generation. How can we put more generating assets, particularly gas turbines, onto the grid soon enough and ramp them up quick enough? But that's only part of the story. It's also the grid itself, and there's so much need for building out the grid, reinforcing the damage that's been done by Russia targeting these assets and things like that. So it's about a 50-50. If anything, I think we're leaning more towards energy on the grid side than even the generation side. Others are helping on generation too. But grid is really where the need is the most. So that's the stability part. But the second part of this is the flexibility, because these are very unusual circumstances. You have, Russia targeting stable, solid energy generating assets. How can you work that in real time? One of the things we're doing is we've been shipping gas turbines that are on trailers that can be moved strategically around the country, a little harder to target. Gas turbines themselves are pretty difficult to target versus some other types of stationary sources. But even when you're looking at the grid and you can kind of tell where there's a transformer station, how do you use digital technology to reroute that in the real time, just like we would with a weather event, to make sure that they have as much flexibility as possible. So we're all learning things together, but trying to run against the clock, a sense of urgency to meet those demands for stability and flexibility simultaneously at the same time.
Very important points. So Ambassador, Bechtel, of course, is well known for major projects around the globe, be they energy, mining, other major infrastructure projects. So your experience, and we're looking at the opportunity for Ukraine to emerge not just as a source of raw materials, but as a real integrated partner in the value-added mineral energy supply chains. What do you see as the most critical success factors for executing those major infrastructure projects?
Well, thank you, Marty, for the question. And I also want to extend thanks to the U.S. Chamber, both for providing the platform today for this important conversation, but also for being such a strong advocate throughout its many years leading, being a voice for U.S. business. And I've had throughout my career the pleasure of working with the U.S. Chamber in many different contexts, many different countries. And I always deeply, deeply appreciated the partnership. So I wanted to say that at the outset. But I also want to thank our Ukrainian colleagues for being here, for helping to inform the U.S. business community about what is happening in Ukraine today, but also what are their aspirations and goals for the future. So Marty, as you mentioned, Bechtel has been working for many decades, over 125 years of history, of building critical infrastructure, civil infrastructure, energy projects, petrochemical projects, entire cities, rail projects, transport corridors around the world. We have worked in the most challenging environments. We have worked in countries that have been calm, stable, but just needed those incredibly complex projects to come to fruition on time, on schedule, on budget. And this is where Bechtel always comes in, steps up, and delivers. And from this vast experience, I will tell you that there are several ingredients that have to come together to not just launch a project, but really to sustain it throughout its full timeline. Those ingredients, some of them have already come up in our discussion, as we have heard from the Deputy Minister. Ukraine is endowed with rich resources, so the resources are absolutely critical. The talent, the people skills, the people who will actually deliver these projects, again, critical. The regulatory architecture that needs to underpin these sorts of projects is, again, very, very important. And Ukraine, as we have heard, is bringing online new laws that will give greater confidence to the private sector, to investors who are looking at these projects. But what really struck me today are the intangibles, if you will, that Ukraine has also demonstrated so magnificently throughout the past 3 years. The courage, the grit, the determination to succeed against all odds. Those are also something that I think investors not only take note of, but are inspired by and get more confidence that their projects will succeed. So On our side of the ledger, the United States and other partners of Ukraine, of course, we have the capital. As we just heard from the Assistant Secretary, we have the technology, the know-how that we can bring to bear, the latest techniques. All of these are absolutely crucial for the success of major complex projects of the sort that we're talking about. But finally, at the end of the day, you really need companies like Bechtel and other EPC companies out there that can bring all these ingredients together and translate them into reality, into real infrastructure, industries, sectors like mining that we're discussing on this panel. So, it's, again, something that we're very proud of, our legacy in bringing and blending together these ingredients to then deliver successful projects that can propel not just Ukraine, but many countries forward.
Thank you. That experience you've had around the globe is really helpful here. And let me also just say thank you for your comments about the chamber. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you you've got a lot of fans throughout the building.
Thank you.
From your career. So, Assistant Secretary, maybe getting me more specific here. Where do you see the most immediate opportunities for U.S. technology, engineering, and capital, to engage here in this partnership? And what do you see as the barriers?
Thank you for the question. And I would say the Deputy Minister pointed out that there's specific resources that Ukraine is uniquely blessed in. And the titanium metals are obviously one where you have truly tremendous resources. The way we've identified problems at the Department of Energy from a science and technology standpoint is to be both specific. So for this week, for example, we announced 5 different projects that are moving ahead in the United States on novel gallium recovery. It's like very specific, one really specific mineral that we are trying to look at that supply chain and how to recover that. But then we also have a broader approach where we're looking broadly at how to change the processing and refining. As the Deputy Minister said, it is a very chemically intensive process. And how can we do that better? Here in the United States, we are absolutely leading the world in new technology. It is working in our labs, it's working in our pilot facilities. It will now hopefully take that next leap and really transform the processing of critical minerals and other materials into usable substances. I think both in the highly specific, so titanium sponge, titanium metals, or in the broader around mining and processing. We're taking I'd say a truly American innovation approach to how we solve this. We are not trying to catch up with the rest of the world by doing more of what we used to do. We had a very robust mining and metallization industry in the United States 50 years ago. We're not just trying to turn that back on. We're trying to go someplace very different. And I would say it is our partners at GE, our partners at Bechtel. Those are the partnerships that will allow us to commercialize the technology that our 17 national labs are working on, that our thousands of scientists and partner companies all around the country. In just the last 12 months, we've issued over $1 billion in funding to really dramatically advance these activities. If we keep those just here in the US, we're not going to help anyone, and that's not our intention. That's not why we're here. That's not why the United States government has taken a new approach to collaboration across our agencies around integration with our friends at DFC and Commerce and the National Security Council, the State Department, and the Department of War, amongst many others, USTR, where our technologies they need to know about so that we can all collectively advance mining, metallization, processing, and refining around the world, and especially in nations like Ukraine that are not only blessed with the natural resources, but also the desire to move the needle and be a steady supplier of those critical elements to success of any nation. So it starts with energy, which you have. And then it continues on with this innovation, and hopefully the rest of the world will benefit from you and Ukraine as a great producer of some of the most necessary inputs to our industrial process.
You've laid out some really great opportunities here. Let me ask you, what do you see as potential barriers to being able to advance that? And I ask that somewhat selfishly so that we know as the chamber, what are the things we need to go tackle? You know, we do policy. You know, there are things that we can be doing to help with that.
Well, I mean, energy in general, not just production of critical minerals, but big systems are capital intensive. They're long-term in nature. These are not software solutions, though I'll say the application of AI and software solutions will enable us to recognize that transformation in a very significant way. For example, we're partnering with a bunch of private companies who are building new refining processes. We can build a digital twin and iterate on that process in AI 100 times faster than we ever could in a lab. And so using those technologies, and that's one way that I think the Chamber could understand, that is an intersection between fast-moving business and artificial intelligence helping slow-moving business, the building of really big things that are difficult to permit, difficult to procure the materials for. It's hard to get a turbine. It's really hard to get grid connect. There's all these things that require a lot of power, and those are the big impediments, I would say. It is not for lack of desire, capital, ingenuity, or process, but time is our enemy, and just the magnitude of what we're trying to do is going to be a hurdle. But we're going to tackle it, and we'd love your help.
Excellent, thank you. No, I appreciate that. So, Ambassador, let me come back to you. You laid out very well Bechtel's role in delivering these big complex energy industrial projects, you know, at scale here. So, where do you see the most immediate execution-ready opportunities in Ukraine today, and how do we accelerate execution on those projects?
Well, Marty, it will not surprise you if I start by talking about energy. Again, as we heard from the Prime Minister, from the Deputy Minister, from the Assistant Secretary, and Roger, energy is absolutely key to everything. And we are, whenever we work and wherever we work, whenever we launch one of these major capital-intensive, time-intensive projects, energy is always the first priority, is how do we get the power necessary to get started on any project. So that is obviously important for some of these discrete projects that we had already heard from DFC about, but also it is critical, as we heard from the Prime Minister and others, just the basic human need, right? I mean, so you're trying to balance both addressing the human needs with getting the foundation in place for additional work on some of these critical minerals or other projects. So that's absolutely key, fundamental, and that would certainly be topmost mind for Bechtel. Second is logistics and transport infrastructure. Again, you can have a great mining facility like the one that we're looking at on the screen, but and it can be producing all sorts of minerals, all sorts of ore, but unless you can then get it to the factories and processing facilities and then onwards to the markets, it really is meaningless. So those are, I would say, two critical areas where we would be looking for the initial opportunities and priorities. Beyond that, I think that, as we've already heard from DFC and others, there are projects in the pipeline that are moving forward and are, sort of rising to the top of the list. Usually for us, as EPC contractors, we would be looking for the top 2 or 3 projects, making sure that they are delivered on time, on budget, and with the necessary requirements all having been met. That gives investors who are looking at other projects the confidence that now the business environment is there, it's conducive to more investment and more projects along the way. And again, there's nothing like success that breeds future success. And so that would be certainly our recommendation to our Ukrainian friends is, focus on the really core priorities, energy, logistics, transport, and then sort of the top few projects that need to be delivered successfully in order to then replicate that success and create really a template for success beyond those initial first few projects.
That makes sense. Thank you. So Deputy Minister, let's maybe pull up a little bit here and think about the overall energy and mineral security of Europe itself and helping to decrease its dependence on adversarial suppliers for energy. And what we've been hearing here is that Ukraine has an important role to play, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to explain what is Ukraine's role in helping not just itself, but the broader European energy and mineral security picture.
Well, Marty, thank you. I would like to say that first of all, we have to look at the predicament and at the problematic in one simple fashion. What is being the biggest problem? The biggest problem that the market is being flooded by a very, very small number of countries that produce cheap product. We can debate about the quality of the product, but the situation is that we all know the country that can sustain production at a price inversion, basically. So basically, the key problem is that who are we benchmarking European, for example, if we take the European continental space, who are we benchmarking the mineral security, the products that it needs, the upstream, the midstream, the end product use? We are benchmarking against, for example, Chinese manufacturing that can sustain economies of scale of immense proportions and that can sustain a price inversion, something that no European country can basically sustain at the moment. So that's a predicament number one. Predicament number two that we are all talking about, as the first problematic develops, that means we are getting hit in a very, very, I would say, uncomfortable place in our kind of business system and industrial system. The issue is that our margins erode. We cannot, as we are losing the battle to those who can sustain large economies of scale, the margins erode. That's a big problem. And then number three problem is the fact that a very, very, I would say, over-regulated and over-complex system of licensing, certification, registration, etc., has actually led to the fact that midstream capacity has been lost in Europe. A lot of people ask me, where is like the next big problem? I said the next big problem is already here. And it's not about the fact of how we can solve the upstream. It's about the fact of what we need to do to get the midstream solved. And as Assistant Secretary has highlighted very importantly, when you have talked about magnets, for example, I believe that one of the best examples of modern tackling of the problem has been actually how the United States handled the situation with Mountain Pass and getting the magnets, getting the necessary feedstock and the necessary components rolling and getting the necessary construction of this. Now, if we go back to Ukraine and look at the situation of how can Ukraine be a platform for securing of such elements and components for Europe, well, the answer is very simple. Ukraine is perfectly located, has the natural resource base, and is well endowed in that sense. And most importantly, Ukraine has a very natural kind of history of working with hydrometallurgy and heavy processing. Now, do we need to build a new bicycle or create a new bicycle? No, we already have a construction. Yes, it's not a perfect construction. Yes, it's ages, decades old. But we have something that we can build upon. We have an understanding of what we need to achieve. For example, Ukraine was one of the biggest manufacturers of gallium products all the way until the war had started, the full-scale invasion and war had started. Ukraine was also a massive producer of germanium. Why was Ukraine a massive producer of germanium products? Well, very simple. The polycrystallic and monocrystallic lenses that come out of the germanium processing, they are produced through a chloride cycle, so using chlorine. So basically, Ukraine, thanks to its titanium sponge production facilities in history, was able to, in parallel, extract germanium and actually feed germanium into the supply chains of Europe and other countries. Now, that all had been stalled and stopped. our predicament and our question is not to actually build a new bicycle, it's to try to reanimate and resume these operations right now. We already have a number of vehicles, thanks to the DFC and to the Treasury and to everybody and I almost said good-looking team, well, the hard-working team that has been behind this. And, and basically the idea and the logic is that, look, we can use that infrastructure that we have set up already. We can use it to basically deploy instruments like margin guarantee instruments, like government-backed offtakes, like, for example, price floors, et cetera, et cetera. There is an infrastructure that can kind of be fed with all of these additional instruments. And last but not least, Ukraine, since being a country that has a kind of ground zero at the moment in terms of a lot of the financial infrastructure that is needed, so basically I'm talking about the de-risking infrastructure, this is the perfect chance to come with a new set of ideas and basically what has worked, what has not worked in the West, like I'm talking about like the recent offtake agreements, et cetera, and basically we can transport or transposition the best of those onto Ukraine right now. That will give enough security to actually de-risk some of these projects. And my idea is that this is perfect because, look, we cannot wait for Europe to deploy titanium processing. We cannot wait for Europe to deploy zirconium extraction or hafnium extraction, which is so critical for the nuclear sector, for example. So the idea is that Ukraine, I actually worked at a location that actually used to produce, extract zirconium and then hafnium all the way until 2004, and there are still people who know that process. So the logic is, let's use the best that we have. Let's, any crisis can be turned into a victory. So in that sense, that's what we can offer.
Excellent. Well, Deputy Minister, you're clearly demonstrating what the ambassador was talking about before about the Ukrainian courage, resilience, dedication, and energy that you bring to the challenge that we have here. So thank you for that. Roger, turning back to you, I mean, in the midst of this, we're talking about all these great opportunities, but let's not forget that Ukraine is facing repeated attacks on its energy infrastructure, every day. And I want to get from your perspective, how do you think about the balance between the short-term emergency response needs and the longer-term investments needed to build that resilient, efficient, digitally enabled power system? And maybe, where do those converge and where do they diverge?
Marty, and I would just add to your comments about the Deputy Minister, I would also add optimism. I think that's another theme we've seen from every interaction with Ukraine in the last few years, is this unrelenting sense of optimism in challenging times that kind of inspires us as well, and clearly coming through the Deputy Minister, which I think everyone up here on the stage shares. So this question about what are we here to serve? Are we here to serve the emergency, or are we here to serve the reconstruction and the ultimate long-term prosperity that flourishes in other parts of the world as well? This is something we struggle with. We are thinking about it all the time, and maybe I should say we were thinking about it all the time, and the way we think about it is we are here to serve. Ukraine is not a market that we chase. Ukraine is a market that we serve. And so we have to take our direction, our lead to some extent from Ukraine. I think the Assistant Secretary said it very well, that this is a sense of urgency. We're working against the clock. What matters is the winter, and how are we planning now for the winter, and what are the needs by that time. But she also talked about how hard it is to get turbines, and I think while we are making turbines available, we need to know Ukraine is our #1 priority. So if Ukraine needs turbines, they need substations, they need transformers, we need a lot of planning on that so we can have some tough conversations with another customer and say, we're sorry, we have to move it forward and accelerate it with Ukraine. And so I said this at a breakfast this morning with the Prime Minister. I think we all have a sense of regret. We have a regret we have to even ask this question. I think we'd all prefer to be here right now and focus on nothing but reconstruction. Wouldn't that be a nice day to just say, how do we do the reconstruction? Let's put all our energy into that. And so unfortunately, we're not in that place. I don't think any of us really know when we'll be able to have that discussion. So what we've come to learn is it no longer matters whether this is for the near term or the long term. What matters is we are just moving with that urgency, and we are serving Ukraine today. And we're not going to no longer debate what are we doing near term, what are we doing long term. All of this serves the present, and all of it serves the future. There's no daylight between those two things. And I think even in Ukraine, there was some debate about that for some time. We were getting conflicting messages. I think we all agree on this. So I go back to what I said earlier. It's about stability and flexibility. What does Ukraine need? How can we serve it? How can our competitors serve it? How can the US partner with us? How can the US and the EU partner together? How can we just serve this country, this need? And it's that immediate generation, it's the flexibility in the grid. And then we can think about how does that later serve Europe? How does it later serve jobs and manufacturing? I will say this, anything Ukraine is doing is state of the art. They are not taking kind of buckets and bolts and trying to get them, onto the grid. They will fix things as they need, but anything they're getting from us, anything they're getting from our competitors is state-of-the-art technology that's not only lifting up the quality in Ukraine, it's frankly lifting up the quality in Europe. And we're going to see this scenario where Europe becomes this net exporter of electricity because what they're doing today is going to play that long-term game. So that's the way we're thinking about it now. I think that's probably the approach we should be thinking about, is the sense of urgency, as the Assistant Secretary said, and just making sure we're serving them with the needs that they have in anticipation of the demands that are coming up with winter.
I think it's a really important perspective, and I appreciate that. So, Assistant Secretary, let me ask you to look ahead 10 years. Okay, if we're, 10 years from now, how can the cooperation today that everyone is here, committed to, how can that help anchor Ukraine more deeply into that transatlantic energy and industrial system, while also strengthening their global energy and mineral security?
Well, the transatlantic partnership that we have today, and under President Trump's leadership and support, at least of the critical mineral sector, of the energy agenda, of the recognition for the first time since the last term that energy is everything, and we understand that, and we are there to be a supporter, we're there to be an enabler, and we're there to help use the technology and resources in the United States that we have built and invested in to partner with Ukraine. And 10 years from now, Ukraine hopefully is going to be one of the leading producers of metals and then materials in Europe. And not just metals and materials, but you have amazing resources in potash, for example. And there are ways that the rest of the world will significantly benefit from Ukraine's expertise and knowledge. We want to be an enabler of that success. One thing that the Deputy Minister said that is something that's harder to build, but that Ukraine already has, which is the knowledgeable workforce. And that's a 10-year plan for a lot of other countries. Ukraine has that, and they have a history and a background in some of these difficult, heavy industries that I don't think you're going to see in Paris. I mean, there's just not that workforce. There are other countries around the world that also have similarly heavy industry expertise and knowledge that will enable them. So I think Ukraine is going to be a leader 10 years from now in Europe as a producer of some of the most critical elements to energy security, their national security, and their economic security.
Well, let me pick up with the Deputy Minister on that, kind of build on that. And earlier you laid out a very compelling vision and path forward for for advancing Ukraine here. Help us understand some specific policy, regulatory, institutional changes that would most accelerate private investment in Ukraine at times, particularly during wartime, and which, or perhaps which of those are already underway, or still constrained by the current wartime.
Well, I think that one of the key priority policies that we have deployed, and I have to thank the United States for this. This was an amazing, in my opinion, an amazing kind of example of economic statecraft, and this was the UREF fund. Basically, the idea that intra-governmental or basically two sovereign nations getting together and actually using a mechanism from the private market, the private sector, and using a mechanism of an equity fund to actually start pushing forward on many strategic projects and on the strategic agenda. The reason is very simple. First, loss equity somebody needs to do it. That's the one core idea. So basically, one instrument has been already deployed. A second instrument that we definitely are working on and need deployment, we're already working on it very heavily and very, very regularly. It's basically both local war risk insurance and more nationwide. So basically basically regional war risk insurance and nationwide war risk insurance. But they have to be very, very carefully prioritized, and they have to be very, very carefully tiered. But if we can solve the problem of actually moving away from just classical PRI insurance and moving into, for example, wartime war risk insurance in property risk or in construction risk, we can really get far, because that will unlock a lot of issues and a lot of problems for capital holding in companies or investors who have the equity, who have the capital, who have the capacity, but are lacking the insurance component. And so basically we are working on that. We are actually using some of the European mechanisms like the Ukraine investment framework. We are working very, very, shoulder to shoulder with the DFC to get the scope of insurance mechanisms that we can apply and use to be much more wider. So the work is being done already. But we are also committing to this on a local level of basically where the state will provide a number of priority war-affected frontline regions with war risk insurance mechanisms. So the Ukrainian government is showing that we're willing to lead the way and then implement these policies and processes. So in my opinion, those are two key components. And a third component is basically something that we all need to work on, is to basically this is a more longer-term vision, and that's cluster economics. We need to get back to the idea of building and setting up both mining, extraction, and processing in a cluster approach. You cannot have a mining and processing facility without the necessary ecosystem around it. So basically, for example, like sulfuric acid production, or for example, chemical reagents production. And of course, that ties into what Roger has highlighted so importantly, the energy infrastructure that would feed that. Because as we realize right now, without a very solid baseline energy production capacity, we're just going to be losing, because otherwise our cost of productions will be rising up, and these will be OPEXs that we cannot sustain, because we have some countries across the world who can basically sustain very, very different OPEXs. And when I look at the numbers, it kind of scares me. So the idea is the only way that we can tackle that is combining a very, very robust and comprehensive financial infrastructure with cluster economy. And that can give a very, very good result. And I believe that the United States will be a key player in actually setting that up in Ukraine and, launching these kind of clusters that we want to do.
Excellent. Hey, well, Ambassador, let me ask you to maybe build on the Deputy Minister's comments there. And I know we had a panel on financing earlier, but it is a critical piece of the equation here. So in order for these projects to move at speed, and from Bechtel's perspective, what can drive and enable those bankable, executable projects?
Thanks, Marty. Well, look, at the end of the day, I think it's about trust, confidence, and what Roger so aptly termed this unrelenting optimism. So trust is, I think, the key element where investors are looking to see how the government is performing. Do they trust the reforms? Do they trust the enabling legislation to really deliver the kind of environment in which they feel comfortable to make these sizable bets on some of these incredibly capital-intensive projects? Confidence, and we've touched on this throughout this morning, is about the trajectory that Ukraine is on. Do you have the confidence as an investor that a year from now, 10 years from now, there is going to be a better situation, better economy, more growth, some of the projects that the Deputy Minister just described coming to fruition. So that's the confidence piece. And then finally, as I said, the optimism that has been patently obvious to all of us who have listened to the presentations this morning. We in Bechtel definitely take an important role in building both the confidence and hopefully contributing to that optimism along the way throughout the projects that we have done over the decades and around the world. We have always prioritized what I would call the 3 Ps, the projects themselves, the people that bring them to life, and then the partnerships that ultimately they create. So projects, as I mentioned earlier, it's absolutely critical to pick projects that are going to yield success, that are going to develop that template for success, that are going to build the supply chains, the talent pipelines, to then, again, create additional positive conditions for future follow-on projects. So that's definitely a key element. People, as we've heard, just tremendous talent and experience already there, but I really took to heart the Prime Minister's comment in the morning session over breakfast, where she said, we would love to bring back the people who had left because of the conflict. And how do you do that? Again, you create opportunities for people back home, right? So that they have something that will draw them back home. So that is something that, again, we like to create, no matter where we're working, is opportunities for the local talent to get involved and to eventually, hopefully progress along the way. And then finally, I mentioned the partnerships that eventually and inevitably grow out of our work around the world. And all of these three elements, I think, really give the confidence to the investors that the projects are going to be delivered on time, on schedule, and with the and meeting all of the relevant requirements of the customers first and foremost, Ukraine, and the investors.
Thank you. Well, Roger, we're at time, but I want to give you the opportunity for a last word here.
No, I think the ambassador said so well. I was reflecting, we've taken in a refugee family as others have, and it's sad, right, to see a boy away from his father for this long, and the reality is they need to be here, not maybe even less about safety and security these days, but about economic opportunities for the mother and things like that. And it'll be a good day when they get to be reunited. And we can talk about energy and all these things, but I think that's what we're here for. We've always seen a three-phase approach from our perspective: serve the emergency, rebuild, and then export in terms of manufacturing and create jobs to export transformers. And we've seen those as three steps along the way. We didn't really talk about step 3 today, which is how are we supporting factories, how are we supporting jobs. But just like I said on the other question, we've merged 1 and 2. We're merging 1, 2, and 3, and we're not waiting anymore. We're going to be doing workforce development with Ukraine so that they can manage our technology right there, and we're going to be working on those factories so they can start exporting electrification equipment the rest of the world needs. So that's the goal, and we're accelerating all of that together.
Great way to close us out.
And one thing, I had to correct myself because I absolutely misspoke when I said Paris doesn't have metallurgy. France is an amazing bastion of science and technology, especially in critical minerals and metals. So I completely misspoke and wanted to correct myself. And I commend Roger for bringing in a family to your family. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you all, and please, I hope you all help me join me in thanking the panel.
Yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're thrilled to do the third and final panel discussion of the day. We're going to talk about innovation in the broader sense. I'm Chris Roberti. I run the National Security Policy Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I'm really excited to have an outstanding group of people from industry and government here to discuss our topic at hand. So in the interest of time, what I'll do is, why don't we just go really quickly down the panel, let each person just announce their name and their affiliation, and then we'll get right into it. But first, the theme of our topic is we're going to look at Ukraine's extraordinary wartime innovations in areas spanning drones, cyber, and digital capabilities, and dual-use technologies have been central to the success on the battlefield. We'll explore how these innovations can be scaled, commercialized, and integrated into global supply chains with U.S. partners. Topics will include pathways for supporting these emerging technologies and how collaboration between Ukrainian startups, U.S. industry, and governments can build a resilient tech industrial ecosystem. So we'll start to my right with Diana. Why don't you just quickly introduce yourself, and we'll go down the line.
Thank you so much. My name is Diana Pilipenko. I am the Director for International Affairs with Visa, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lewin. I'm the Acting Undersecretary of Foreign Assistance, Humanitarian Affairs, and Religious Freedom at the Department of State.
Hello, everyone. I'm James Lithgow. I'm the Regional Director for Eastern and Southeast Europe for Shield AI.
Hi, I'm Glenn Goddard. I am Parsons Engineering and Technologies Ukraine Program Director.
Hi, Jonathan Taylor. Associate General Counsel for Private Equity and Investment Funds at DFC, also the URIF team lead.
Thank you very much. So let's start out with talking about where Ukraine's innovation story comes from, particularly Ukraine's necessity-driven innovations and its proof of capability over the last 4 years. So we're going to start with James. James, Ukraine has become a global leader in rapid innovation under pressure. Over the past 4 years, what are some of the technologies that have proven essential to responding to the various threats that Ukraine has confronted? And how have partnerships with U.S. companies helped drive that technological innovation?
Yeah, so look, firstly, what Ukraine has achieved and continues to achieve on the battlefield is absolutely outstanding. The sheer pace of innovation, ingenuity, is just remarkable. And I think that's out of necessity. They're faced with an existential threat, and so you either iterate or you lose. And the consequences of losing are obvious for everyone to see. And so there's no option but to iterate and to do it incredibly fast. I spent over a decade in the military and served in combat operations all over the world with many partner forces, and had the privilege of living in Ukraine and working with the Ukrainian armed forces for over a year, deploying different technologies. And it's no surprise when you actually get to spend time with them to see the success that they've had across the battlefield. It's not a surprise. Just the ability to develop and then field these technologies is just incredible. But anyway, so my reflections, I left Ukraine 6 months ago, and Natalia, who's here, and our team, we have 2 offices and an R&D facility now in Kyiv and Lviv, and so we've really expanded our operations there. And so my reflections are just from what I saw, and so I don't know all of the technologies, but I know some of them. The first one is ubiquitous sensing. Every soldier, every civilian, every phone is now just a sensor. It's just a network. You cannot move on the battlefield without being seen. And that is something that I never experienced in my time in the military. Just everything is recorded, whether it's enemy movements, whether it's Telegram channels telling you about air threats, about enemy movements. It is just remarkable. The second is commercial off-the-shelf technology. And that has been an absolute force multiplier. And I think about key things like 3D printing, the ability to build thousands of drones at scale. I think about Starlink, satellite communications, Just remarkable AI models, visual-based navigation tools, target image identifiers, things that they've been able to take and then implement at just rapid speeds. The next is cloud infrastructure. All of this isn't possible without the fast flow of data. Right from the troops on the front line all the way back to command centers. Those vast data centers and cloud infrastructure that is resilient against Russian cyber attacks is just incredible. And then EW resilience, the ability to develop communications that can operate without GPS or when comms are denied. These were technologies that were only accessible to the most advanced militaries only a couple of years ago, and now they're proliferated across the front lines of Ukraine. But the last one that I focus on is the ability to see something and then prosecute a target. This used to be hours when I was in, now it's minutes. And that's truly remarkable. And I think when I think about where US partnership has helped in this areas, I think there's an untapped potential. There's a lot of opportunity. I don't think we're seeing enough partnerships with US companies in Ukraine. But I think the infrastructure and the foundations have been supported by the US technology. I think about cloud infrastructure, as already mentioned. None of that's possible without that AI models that are available. I talked about satellite communication, the ability to communicate. These are all US technologies that are supporting the ecosystem.
Thank you. Jeremy, much of Ukraine's most dynamic innovation today sits at the intersection of defense and commercial sectors, rather than defense and commercial sectors. You've described foreign assistance as increasingly as a form of strategic investment rather than just support. In the context of Ukraine, how's the State Department thinking about transforming wartime innovation into durable commercial ecosystems that then lend themselves to follow-on private investment?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we've seen significant changes in our foreign assistance architecture writ large. I think there have been some changes, obviously, in our overall level of assistance to Ukraine, but we remain incredibly engaged. And so maybe it makes sense to start by talking about Ukraine's role as we see it in the economy of the United States and the economy of Europe, and then sort of how we're continuing to support that alongside DFC and other interagency partners. I think it's no secret to everyone that Ukraine is a tremendously advanced defense actor. Really, I think in Europe, they have the most dynamic defense sector, and it's not even close. A lot of comparisons, people tend to compare Ukraine to Poland when they think about what Ukraine's path of development after this conflict is over, and President Trump remains laser focused on trying to end the war. Ukraine is obviously doing incredibly well on the battlefield, defending themselves against continued Russian aggression, but the only way that Ukraine is going to achieve its economic and social potential is through, a settlement that allows Ukraine to transform this industrial capacity, the technological development that they've had, into, private sector growth and general prosperity, and that can't happen while the war is ongoing. But Ukraine in many senses is less like Poland, more like Israel. When we think about Ukrainian capabilities and also the value add for American partners and the defense industry. So Ukraine is an incredible test bed for a lot of our most emerging technologies. We saw that over the last few weeks and months. Ukraine's experience dealing with the Shahed drones and sort of Russian drone swarms more generally, incredibly valuable, and it's something that our partners are recognizing as well. Ukraine's ability to serve as a test bed for American technology has been incredibly valuable, both to our companies and to our military forces as well. And I think Ukraine's ability and the announcement by President Zelensky a few days ago about how they're sort of thinking about arms exports, I think that much more mirrors Israel than any other sort of partner that we've seen over the last few decades. And so I think that's a really instructive example about how we're thinking about investing in Ukraine. An incredibly self-reliant, incredibly technologically advanced and aggressive partner, which sort of advances a lot of the principles that President Trump wants all of our allies to live by, around self-reliance, around paying their fair share, around stepping in to help allies in times of need. And so I think when we think about investing in Ukraine, we think with that long-term vision in mind. How do we leverage our partnership with Ukraine into creating the next Israel in Europe? And so, I think that's maybe something that's poorly understood about U.S. policy and our diplomatic policy writ large. The State Department still has a very high level of overall assistance to Ukraine. It's been refocused on a few different sectors and investments. So last year, we obligated more than $1 billion of total assistance. About $250 million of it is of sort of a fund alongside. DFC has the Ukraine Reconstruction Fund. DFC has a different risk tolerance than the department has. So foreign assistance really, until this administration, had never really been thought about as a way to engage the private sector and do investment-like activity. I mean, there are some examples, people disagree about that, but we've made that much more of an emphasis in our foreign assistance strategy. But at the same time, DFC has a lower risk tolerance. That's the way the agency was established. That's the way that their authorities work. We have, conversely, a much higher risk tolerance. So we're able to invest in projects alongside DFC and create a whole value chain. And that's incredibly important in somewhere like Ukraine, where they are still at war. And a lot of the projects you're investing in have, political risks, military risks, other risks that, can't properly be rationalized by a purely financial investment. So we obligated $250 million for that, particularly focused on the critical minerals sector. We have another $250 million of continued energy support. I was at an event a few weeks ago with President Zelensky and Chris Wright, where we're talking about how we're getting American companies to help rebuild Ukraine's energy sector, nuclear, gas, the grid, and I think some of the other panels have talked about how ingenious Ukrainian engineers have been, but also the importance of American companies in supporting that with material, and that's a tremendous opportunity on a lot of different dimensions for American energy dominance. Ukraine has significant stores, and the innovations that they've developed in the grid sector are, I think, going to be incredibly important as we look to rebuilding a lot of the grids in the West, including our own sort of, frankly, decaying grid in the United States. And then, about $400 million of humanitarian assistance. Obviously, the winter was very challenging, with continued Russian energy attacks. So, we continue to support a wide-ranging emergency short-term humanitarian response in coordination with European and other partners. And then we have a number of other programs I was proud to announce alongside First Lady Zelenska a couple weeks ago. A program, $25 million program in coordination with Congress to help return children that were abducted, and return them to Ukraine and reintegrate them. But I think even in that sector, one of the things we're working on is how do we leverage Ukrainian ingenuity. So, for example, they have their virtual education system is much more developed than anything that we have in the United States, and that's again by necessity, because children are learning in bunkers, but the tools that they have can be replicated to help us deliver education across the world and with a lot of our other partners and here in the United States. So we continue to look for ways to leverage that assistance to get technology transfer and to help use those lessons. We also are working with a lot of American companies that are very active in Ukraine. I would push back slightly on the concept that there hasn't been enough work with American companies. I mean, I meet with Palantir, for example, who's heavily invested in Ukraine. They told me the other day, we want as many Ukrainian engineers as we can. I mean, the talent pool is just tremendous. It exists nowhere else in Europe, particularly in the software space. Like if you go to San Francisco, the proportion of ML engineers, like high-end ML engineers that are Ukrainian is like off the charts. And then if you think about, sort of the salary arbitrage, frankly, American companies can't wait to get in there and leverage the human capital in Ukraine fast enough. And that's something that we can work to develop structures to make sure that American companies have access to do so in the right way. Starlink launched their direct-to-cell service. The first place they launched it in the world was Ukraine, which has one of the highest Starlink densities anywhere in the world. And both Palantir and Starlink are key US partners, and we support their work in Ukraine and elsewhere. So I think that's a bit about how we're thinking about using foreign assistance as a tool of strategic investment and commercial diplomacy as we continue to work towards peace.
Got it. Thank you. Diana, I think we can all agree that Ukraine may be the most striking example of the axiom that necessity is the mother of invention. From your perspective, how has operating in a wartime environment pushed the boundaries of what's possible in an area that's near and dear to Visa's heart, which is digital payments? And how's Visa drawn on its worldwide network and capabilities to meet the very specific needs and local challenges that Ukrainian businesses and citizens have faced over the last 4 years?
Thank you for that question. I think it's fair to say that we at Visa have a very unique appreciation of Ukraine's ingenuity. We have been in Ukraine for decades. Our office in Kyiv is the headquarters for 17 countries in the region. That includes Eastern Europe, Central Asia, South Caucasus, and the Balkans. We have more than 160 employees based in Ukraine, and we work very closely with dozens of fintechs, banks, and startups in Ukraine. So here's what we've seen. Necessity has accelerated innovation in Ukraine. In the last 4 years, Ukraine has digitized faster than many countries do in peacetime. One great example of this is Ukraine's merchants have been early adopters of our tap-to-phone technology. This is something that turns any smartphone into a point-of-sale device that can accept digital payments with no hardware needed. And so it's quite amazing that despite the war, despite the devastation it has brought, Ukraine has not reverted to cash. This is a huge success, and in part, this is because our partners in Ukraine have been able to lean on Visa's global infrastructure and our fortified networks in time of need. Visa operates one of the world's most resilient digital infrastructures. It's called the VisaNet. It reaches across 200 plus countries and territories. Every year, it processes more than 300 billion transactions. And in the last 5 years, we've invested more than $13 billion in infrastructure, cyber defenses, fraud prevention, all to ensure that each of those 300 billion transactions is secure, no matter its geography. And so, pivoting back to Ukraine, I want to just underscore, it is so digitally sophisticated, it's remarkable. It's really emerged as a flagship market for Visa. Many or several of the cutting-edge technologies that we've introduced around the world, we launched in Ukraine first, and to really great effect. Among these is, for instance, automated ways of authenticating your identity when you're conducting transactions. So AI-enabled data analysis, biometrics, tokenization, replacing the manually entered SMS code. So it's much faster, much more secure. Another great example is in July of 2022, Ukraine was among the first markets where we launched something called Visa Cloud Connect. This allows Ukrainian banks to connect to VisaNet through the cloud, bypassing physical local infrastructure. In a country where tangible infrastructure is vulnerable to daily attacks, this technology has been really, really critical. And it bears stressing that these innovations wouldn't have succeeded without our phenomenal partners in Ukraine. So Ukraine's fintechs and banks such as Privatbank have been really amazing in helping us bring these to life.
Thank you. I mean, that point about was striking about how despite the devastation, the economy didn't revert to cash, and it made me instantly think about what Jeremy is talking about, energy and energy security, and then what James was talking about with the importance of having cloud infrastructure functioning and active, and that all of that enables the digital payments to continue. So. We're going to move to Jonathan at DFC, and I'll give you, if you want to rebut what he said about DFC's risk tolerance, you're welcome to. But recently, DFC announced an investment in an emerging tech company in Ukraine to bolster Ukraine's defense and secure access to field-tested advanced technology for the U.S. How did DFC weigh the development impact against geopolitical and operational risks? And what does this decision signal about DFC's long-term role in conflict-affected areas?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's a very rich question, so I'm going to kind of unpack it in 3 levels. One, I'm going to actually talk about a reauthorization in December. 2, I'm going to talk about URIF as a whole and the future of URIF and URIF-type projects for DFC, and then I'm going to talk about SIDE. So first of all, on reauthorization. So many of you in this room know, DFC was reauthorized on a bipartisan basis in December. It was very strong support, across the board. Our liability cap, maximum liability, which is essentially like our balance sheet, went from 60 billion to 205 billion. We got this equity revolver, essentially, which increased our ability to make equity investments, which is my main job. And importantly for this conversation, our mandate was tweaked a little bit. And we've always had this dual mandate, right, which is foreign policy and development. But the reauthorization made it very clear that our dual mandate is reaffirmed in that we are a tool of foreign policy as well as a development institution. So that really distinguishes us from our peers like EBRD or IFC. We are a tool of foreign policy, and that is very clear in the congressional bill that was passed in December. So to answer your question, we are doing foreign policy. That is very clear now. We are also doing development, and those two things are working together. Now, talking about URIF and URIF's role in, frankly, the reauthorization and the future of DFC. So, and as mentioned, I was one of the negotiators of the minerals deal, team lead for DFC on the URIF implementation, and now working on the investment side. I couldn't be prouder of the work that the DFC, our Treasury colleagues, our state colleagues, and the Ukrainian side have done to operationalize URIF in really a remarkably fast amount of time. And to get to our investment, sort of to get our first investment approved in less than a year from the signing of the documents, considering the amount of work we had to do, frankly, to get there, was an achievement that I'm personally very proud of, and I'm very proud of everyone who worked on that project, worked to get us to this place. And it's a lot of individuals who put in an enormous amount of time to get us there. But I think very importantly, URIF is seen from the President of the United States to cabinet secretary level down to members of Congress on both sides of the aisle as a tremendous success. It is being seen, and I get this feedback from all kinds of different government officials, but also from the private sector, that this is really a new model of economic statecraft. And we are really being seen as something that can impact DFC's role, but also across the board in the US government of how to do economic statecraft in an innovative way. And I think it's a really, that I would like to think, did impact our ability to get the reauthorization through as we did, and is really seen as a potential future model for DFC across the board. So this is something that I think for our future is really important. Now, back to SIGN, right? Our investment that we announced a few weeks ago. So development mandate, foreign policy mandate. I think in this case, it's a very clear marriage of the two. The foreign policy story with this particular technology, it's just very obvious, right? It's a GPS-denied navigation software firmware company that does primarily at this point in time counter UAS, right? Counter drone technology. I mean, we've been looking at it for months, but the sort of situation in the Gulf kind of made the case more strongly than ever we could have on words on paper about how just absolutely critical this technology is for the future, not just of Ukraine, but of America and our allies, and how important this technology is going to be for the future of the world. So, the story for foreign policy perspective, very easy to make. On a development side, I also think the story is very easy. It's about economic growth in Ukraine. It's about jobs. It's about job creation. And that, for me, having, frankly, conversations with Ukrainian partners, with the Ukrainian government, the private sector, everybody that I talk to in Ukraine sees the sort of dual use or defense tech sector as a key driver of economic growth for Ukraine going forward. As Jeremy said very rightly, this is seen as one of the key, technological comparative advantages of Ukraine, in Europe, but also globally. And this is going to be, I think, an area of growth and innovation going forward. So the fact that we can support and sort of, give this, stamp of approval and sort of benefit to the sector, I think, is a really good way to support economic development in Ukraine.
Thank you. And Glenn, moving from the digital to the very physical, American's interstate highway system was originally designed to support national defense, be able to move equipment and things and troops from place to place quickly. But it also turned out to be an excellent engine for economic growth and economic expansion. So how can Ukraine be thinking about the US highway system, and how can they institute a similar project to sort of drive their expansion and eventual reconstruction?
Oh, thank you for the question. Yeah, the one resource that you can't get more of is time.
Yeah.
So use the time now. Don't wait for peace to break out and then we'll start. You can do all sorts of planning now for execution once we've reached the right conditions. And you bring up a great example of the interstate highway system that Eisenhower developed based upon his experiences of trying to travel across the country in 1918, and it was hard. So it was the Ukrainians now need to recalibrate and say, okay, we had an old Soviet system, but what can we do to fit not only a modern system, but the reality of the new border that they're going to have. There is, and as much as we would all love for Ukraine to reestablish its original borders, this really is much more like a Korea scenario where that will remain a contested area, hopefully to be regained in the future. But for right now, under any scenario, you're still going to have an enemy over there to the east. So recalibrate all of your infrastructure to support any future fights you would have for that. So redo the interstate highway system, the rail system, the other roads, airports. I mean, it seems crazy to me. I got to finally go over to Ukraine twice last year. There is no direct connection between Odessa and Kyiv, the two largest cities, because that's not the way it was designed back in the 40s or 50s or wherever. Well, those things can be capitalized and you can increase the efficiency of that transport system much more, but the planning should start now. And that would require only a small amount of funding from one of the various Western governments. I'll give the example of, and I'm jealous of my rival firm, Jacobs, just finished doing the master plan for the Lviv airport, funded by the UK government. Why can't we have more of that? Again, these are not large dollars. It's very small compared to the 500+ billion in reconstruction. Let's get all of the firms working on that now. And one of the best pieces of news is that in the Ukrainian military, the State Special Transport Service has been granted new authorities to oversee all of that for defense purposes on where should the roads go, where should the rail go, etc., to make this a better, unified, prepared Ukraine for any potential future fights. And the best future fight is the one that you don't have to fight because you are so well prepared. You're a hedgehog.
Mm-hmm. It's true words. We're gonna shift from what Ukraine is built under duress and look a little bit more about what needs to be put into place from institutional policy and scalability perspectives to ensure that innovation and the progress that Ukraine has made doesn't fail. We're going to start with you, Diana, and maybe you can tell us a little bit briefly about how you've partnered with the government of Ukraine to push forward its digital transformation, what new capabilities have emerged from that collaboration, and how those efforts reinforce the country's economic backbone, particularly with small and medium-sized enterprises.
Well, I want to applaud the government of Ukraine for creating a truly enabling environment where public-private partnerships can thrive. Our work with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, specifically around the DIA app, is a perfect illustration of this. DIA, as many in the room probably know, is often referred to as the state in a smartphone. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainian acronym DIA stands for the state and me, Держава і я. It also means action. And it provides dozens of services to more than 24 million Ukrainians. That's more than half the population. It's truly a marvel of a GovTech platform. Mm-hmm. It works by fusing digital identity with government services and money movement. And so you can register a business, pay your taxes, apply for and receive social benefits and humanitarian assistance. Visa's core contribution to the DIA ecosystem is the secure payments layer. So specifically, our CyberSource technology, it's something that scans billions of transactions processed across VisaNet to find patterns of fraudulent activity and to stop it. That's what forms the backbone of the secure payments on DIA. Building on this, we've worked with the government of Ukraine to pioneer what we call purpose-bound payments. These are digitally issued funds that can be only spent on pre-approved categories of goods, services, vendors. So for instance, these can be used for reconstruction of homes damaged in wartime. And in designing of this program, the government of Ukraine has not only promoted a cashless economy, which is important in its own right, but has also ensured that its very, very scarce resources are used transparently and for their intended purposes. We've also worked a lot with Ukraine on supporting small and medium enterprises, which, as you said, are really the backbone of the economic activity. And for example, one project we're very proud of is called Vidvazhna. It's an accelerator program. Vidvazhna means the brave one in Ukrainian, and it's an accelerator program for women entrepreneurs. It provides them with digital skills and tools, access to capital, financial literacy, and in a country where so many men are on the front lines, women are often running the businesses, taking care of their families, and really holding the economy together. So another one that we've partnered on is called Dia Business. It's a national program for promotion of entrepreneurship and exports, and it's a hybrid of sorts. It's both an online platform, but also a network of physical centers across Ukraine in cities such as Kharkiv, Odessa, Ternopil, and Bucha. And so the numbers are really important here, and they speak for themselves. 10,000 women entrepreneurs have gone through the Vidvazhna Accelerator, and Dia Business has supported more than 50,000 small businesses in Ukraine. And so we've been just really proud to have been a part of these efforts.
Mm-hmm. And rightly so. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about policy or legislative changes that Ukraine has implemented to enable a more commercially friendly industrial environment, especially during the challenges of the last 4 years.
Sure. So, I mean, I think in general, I mean, it was mentioned in the prior panel as well, all of Ukraine's efforts towards EU accession, have made it, I think, a more investable market. And I think, we're in general supportive of that. And obviously, the sort of personal point is that the approval of the URIF investment and the laws around that was something that I think really was a strong signal to the market that Ukraine is open for business and looking for, investment by the United States and our allies. I am also encouraged, while obviously the corruption story is still ongoing, the fact that they're still making strides towards fighting corruption, it's still, it's obviously an important issue. I think there's still more to do. I think one of the things that, in this tech sector, we are, I hear a lot, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs in this area. Export controls is still a big issue when it comes to defense tech. Also, IP licensing coming out of Ukraine is a big question mark, and people are still, are wanting to make sure that there's clarity around that. So that's, I think, still more to be done. And, I mean, my friend Yuri is here. Say that on capital controls, where the regime has gotten better for new money, but there's still questions we get from potential investors is how can I put money in if I can't get it out? Mm-hmm. So there's always questions about that and sort of balancing the legitimate concerns about Ukraine regarding its FX position versus how do you attract new investors to bring money into the country, right, during a capital control regime. So these are issues that everyone is aware of, but there's still more work to be done. But we are encouraged that Ukraine's made great strides in terms of reform. Just sort of, I wouldn't say despite the wartime environment, but in a lot of ways because of the wartime environment and the existential need to kind of get closer to the West and the United States and Europe.
Thanks, Jeremy. How should we be thinking about humanitarian assistance, not just as immediate help or immediate support, but also a stabilizing function that enables growth and investment for the future?
No, absolutely, and I would just underscore, a couple of the points. I think, the anti-corruption efforts are incredibly important, as are the capital control and some of the export control reforms. I'd say a lot of those things, during a wartime environment, Ukraine has made a lot of admirable strides. Those things can't be resolved ultimately, I think, until the war is over, which is why, again, the focus of the administration continues to be on peace, and that's what we believe will deliver, the next generation of prosperity for Ukraine. And also, in the peace plan, we've done a lot of work, and the president's done a lot of work to think about how can we set up structures and how can we partner with Ukraine, in the event of a peace agreement to help build those structures quite rapidly and make Ukraine investable and give them access to more capital. On the question about humanitarian assistance, I think Ukraine is obviously much more developed than a lot of the recipients of large-scale humanitarian assistance. So the nature of the assistance that we deliver is a little different. More of it has to do with fighting the immediate effects of Russian attacks, particularly on civilian infrastructure, particularly on the energy sector, food and cold, during the winter because of attacks on the energy sector. I think the model, which was being discussed in the context of Visa and some of the digital transformation work in Ukraine, is incredibly important as we think about our global humanitarian footprint. Being able to do digital, accountable, efficient, cash-based assistance is important, particularly as people move from in-kind assistance, towards something that's a little bit more sustainable. But I really do think in Ukraine, we tend to separate it more just because the Ukrainian government is so advanced and the sort of private sector industry is so advanced. So we try to target our dollars as much as possible on ameliorating the impact of energy attacks, on repairing energy infrastructure. As you pointed out, I mean, the ability of the private sector to function, the ability of the digital ecosystem to function, not to mention the defense sector, depends on the reliable, supply of energy, right? And so a big focus has been on how can we surge the right resources. And sometimes, the Ukrainians are such good engineers of their energy grid, but a particular component is what's missing, right? And it's like one little thing that they need. And so how can we, really target our dollars? And I think that's where our team on the ground at our embassy has been really, really important. And as we've sort of integrated foreign assistance capacity into the department, they've done a really good job working with the political actors in the Ukrainian system to say, hey, we had an attack last night. We need this type of system. What type of mechanism can we use to get an American supplier of that? How can we put our dollars towards that? Which is obviously an enabler of everything else in the economy. So, I think Ukraine is in a very different situation than most of the recipients of our humanitarian assistance, which is why I think if we can get a peace deal, the recovery will be so much more rapid than what we've seen in a lot of other, sort of conflict scenarios. And so that's what we're really driving towards right now on the political side.
And we just need to get there. We're going to get
That's
there.
right.
Glenn, what is something that we, the Chamber, other associations, or other businesses can help advocate for that the government in Ukraine can put into place to assist businesses operating there and looking to invest there?
Well, as already mentioned by my good friend Jonathan here, those things about export controls, not being able to take money out of the country after you've invested it. I mean, right now I'm looking at can we take Ukraine counter UAS technology and get it over to the Middle East? And I'm touting it that, yeah, but see, that way we won't have to go through ITAR. Getting tech out of Ukraine is almost as painful as ITAR, almost. You have to go through like 17 steps to, and it's just a very antiquated bureaucracy. If Ukraine says they want to be part of the EU, there's nothing stopping you from adopting the EU rules today for things like export control. So that would behoove the government a lot more to create this economy between the world and Ukraine. And that will only benefit Ukraine through increased tax dollars and confidence of future investment.
Can I just say, I hope that Ukraine adopts a much better system, a regulatory system than the horrible European bureaucracy. And that's what we're working with the Ukrainians on, adopting a much more pro-business, pro-innovation. We joke, we were negotiating a document with the Europeans the other day, and they objected to the word pro-innovation. Because they said they don't support innovation, it needs to be tempered by bureaucratic controls. So we hope that they don't adopt that mindset, but instead adopt, what we think is an American attitude of ingenuity and private sector growth.
But I think we can all agree that ITAR is a four-letter word in most contexts these days. James, many of the technologies that are emerging from Ukraine are dual use. So how is Shield AI thinking about balancing military urgency with commercial viability when you're partnering with Ukrainian innovators? And then what helps prevent these innovation technologies from getting stuck in a pilot phase?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. How do I think about this? I think there's a lot of technologies that you see in Ukraine that won't easily transfer, and they're not dual use. They're focused on on solving a specific problem on the front line. But there are a tremendous amount that I think about all the software that goes into a targeting drone, visual-based navigation, pixel lock, image recognition. These are technologies and softwares that you could put in for delivering packages, agriculture, increasing production efficiencies. And so I come back to it, but software is critical. And people have mentioned it on this board. The talent in Ukraine is something I've never seen before. It is just absolutely phenomenal. And it was there before the war, right? It's just been mobilized to defense during the war. But all of those individuals, when the war stops, can really easily pivot what they've designed into something that is, world leading for civilian applications. And there's too many to really bring out here. There's just a myriad of different applications that you could do. And why they've been so successful is, and this pilot phase and a lot of Western technology gets stuck in, is because they're listening to the requirements, to the need. And they're very good at understanding what is the need for the technology. So that's the first thing that you need. Like, you need to design something that is actually a need. Then you need to design something with scale in mind. It's okay designing something that's really pretty and looks great and is super expensive and does a bespoke thing, but if you can't scale it, then you're going to get stuck at that phase because it's not an investment opportunity. And so the way that Shield thinks about it and the way that we're working with our Ukrainian partners is we're focusing on the software. We're focusing on developing really cutting-edge software applications that can scale across numerous different platforms, whether it's a strike platform, whether it's a USV, whether it's in the air, whether it's on the ground, whether it's cleaning windows, whether it's a self-driving vehicle. We're focusing on those applications, and I think that has a tremendous potential to scale, not only during the conflict, but post-conflict.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes left, and so for our last question, I'll ask the same question of everyone and allow you to answer it. Try to keep it crisp, and then we'll keep things on time, because at the Chamber we love to start meetings on time, but we always love to end them on time because that ensures that our audience comes back. So looking ahead, let's talk about what Ukraine must do and what U.S. firms need to invest decisively and position Ukraine as a competitive contributor to innovation and a key actor in global supply chains. So answer that as you may. So let's start with Diana.
Thanks. Looking ahead, so given sort of the model we've already established with Ukraine for successful public-private partnerships and Ukraine's remarkable digital maturity, I think we see a lot of exciting opportunities to collaborate and continue working together in the future, including in the realm of artificial intelligence. Ukraine has recently launched DIA AI. It's the world's first national AI agent for delivery of government services. Ukraine also seeks to be among the top 3 in the world for public sector adoption and advancement of AI. So we're very keen to support Ukraine in that journey. And we've been working and investing in AI for well over 30 years, starting in 1993 when we used AI and machine learning to risk score transactions. So, and kept up those investments ever since. So there's just a lot for us to build on, given the solid foundation we have. So I think I don't have any asks of Ukraine at the moment, but I think we've got a good thing going. So I'll end there.
Chair.
I would just say focus on peace. The peace process involves a lot of difficult decisions, but I think the president is committed that we will help Ukraine recover very, very rapidly and sort of turn into that Israel-like relationship I was talking about, and Ukraine's ability to commercialize all of the innovations that it's had, that it's made is going to depend on that peace process. And so there's such tremendous upside for Ukraine as a strong U.S. partner post-conflict, and as a place where we can invest American dollars, where American companies can come in. But right now, the conflict continues to be the #1 barrier to sort of changing the dynamic right now. And so, I think there are hard choices in the short term, and there's no question about that. But I think in the peace process, to continue to not lose sight of what the tremendous opportunity for a new, free Western Ukraine will be. And that's, I think, where the president and our administration is really focused on trying to help the Ukrainians realize that and achieve that.
Thank you. James.
Yeah, just in the interest of time, it's just data. They've got an incredible amount of valuable data, and the AI tools that they've developed will immediately plug into the global supply chains. And there's just an incessant need for that ability to train Western and other companies' models. So I just focus on how do you plug in now, and then obviously opening up ITAR and export restrictions would be another force multiplier for them.
I'd say the most important thing to me is the U.S. and other Western governments provide at least a small amount of funding for these various projects to get started so that we can partner with Ukrainian firms and teach them, here's the Western way of developing things, and that technology transfer helps grow their capabilities organically. And that would be a long-term investment, I think, that for a small amount of money.
Thank you.
So beyond peace, which I completely agree with Jeremy, will unlock lots of investment in Ukraine. I'd say keep working towards a pro-business, pro-innovation regulatory framework. Support your innovative companies, of which there are many. Keep fighting corruption, because I think that still is, frankly, a concern I hear a lot when I try to bring investment into Ukraine, and to make sure that your innovative companies are allowed to export their technology and operate, around the world and bring the technologies that are being innovated in Ukraine to our allies. So,
well, thank you. Each of you has been very generous with your time, with your thoughts. And I would offer the Chamber's support and partnership in each of your areas as we move forward in these and other areas. So thank you for joining us. Please help me in thanking our panelists today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention just for a few more minutes, please. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Marjorie Chorlins. I'm the Senior Vice President for Europe here at the Chamber, and I can't tell you how grateful we are for your participation at today's event. We obviously are grateful as well to those of us who joined, to those of you who've joined online, and for all of your durability in staying here for the morning. I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our panelists and moderators for their active contribution and engagement, and for all the work that they're doing to build a better Ukraine. We came together today with a very clear purpose: to focus the conversation on Ukraine around practical pathways, areas where progress is possible now and where sustained growth is achievable over the long term. What we heard makes clear that this shift is being driven by real problem solving across the public and private sectors. On capital mobilization, the message was pragmatic and consistent. Private sector investors must be engaged more effectively. Risk-sharing tools, predictable policy frameworks, coordination with international financial institutions, and a credible project pipeline are what turn interest into investment. On energy and critical minerals, Ukraine's relevance extends well beyond its borders. Unlocking Ukraine's long-term energy potential is crucial for Europe's economic resilience and for broader energy security. And Ukraine's mineral resources are part of our larger effort to diversify supply chains, reduce strategic dependencies, and support advanced manufacturing. Lastly, on technology and innovation, Ukraine's ecosystem continues to adapt and advance under extraordinary pressure, as we've just heard. The priority now is connecting that capability to global markets so that innovation translates into durable growth for Ukraine and strengthens technology networks and partnerships that benefit all of us. The US government recognizes these strategic convergences and is exploring more creative ways to work with the sector. We are so grateful for the partnership today of the International Development Finance Corporation, as well as, of course, the esteemed Prime Minister and Suzanne Clark. Our role here at the Chamber is to be a connector and a convener and an advocate, bringing together businesses, governments, and institutions to help turn opportunity into real economic outputs. This forum is part of that effort, and it's the work that our Ukraine Business Initiative does every day. We owe certainly a debt of gratitude to Ambassador Stefanishyat and the Embassy of Ukraine here in Washington for their assistance in coordinating the participation of the Prime Minister and other senior Ukrainian officials. I would also like to acknowledge and recognize the yeoman's work done by my chamber colleagues whose efforts have made this event possible. Our events, creative, communications, AV, catering, and security teams all are the folks behind the scenes that you don't see, but who make this kind of event possible, and we're grateful to them. We're also grateful to our colleagues Marty Durbin and Chris Roberti for their terrific management and moderation of those panels. And lastly, I must acknowledge the tremendous contributions and the dedication of two members of my team, Ivana Zuzel and Sophia Rice, who are singularly responsible really for putting on today's event. Please join me in thanking them. In closing, two last points. One, I hope you leave today with optimism about the possible road ahead for Ukraine and its community of partners, and with a clearer sense of where the private sector can help drive results. Finally, an unrelated but slightly tangential but nonetheless related note. As we all know, Ukraine has been frequently the subject of conversations both at the G7 and the G20. This year, the U.S. holds the G20 and B20 presidency. As the host of the B20, the Chamber will convene the world's largest economies to strengthen the business partnerships, many of which we heard about today, that underpin global growth. On November 9th, the Wharf will become the epicenter of global commerce, giving participants direct access to the countries and businesses that make up 2/3 of global trade all at once. We are mobilizing private sector leaders to be involved in this event, spinning around the major topics of economic growth, innovation, trade, and energy. If you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to become involved, I encourage you to visit b20usa.com. And with that, please help yourself to a muffin on the way out, and thank you very much. We're adjourned.